All right, welcome and good morning. I call to order this meeting of the Texas Veterans Commission Fund for the Veterans Assistance Advisory Committee. At this time, I will take a roll call of the committee members. Mr. Allen.
Here.
Mr. Ball.
Here, ma'am.
Mr. E-Ray.
Here, ma'am.
Mr. Harrison.
Here, ma'am.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Here.
Mrs. Reyna here. Mrs. Sconza called in sick. Mr. Wallace.
Here.
Mr. Wright.
Here, ma'am.
With 8 members present, we do have a quorum. I ask committee member Mr. Ball to now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the U.S. flag.
If you would, please. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I ask committee member Mr. Allen to now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance to the Texas flag.
Honor
the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Thank you. I now open the floor to any members of the public who wish to provide public comment to the advisory committee members on the matters of its purview. Anyone who wishes to speak must have submitted a public comment form. Please limit your comments to no more than 5 minutes. Please remember that this is the time for the advisory committee to consider any public comments, but any discussion or deliberation by the advisory committee for matters that not posted on the agenda must be limited to placing the item on the next meeting of agenda. At this time, are there any speakers? Nothing heard. The next agenda item is the approval of the past meeting minutes. The minutes should be on the table at your seats. If you do not have a copy of the minutes in front of you, please raise your hand to be recognized. The minutes were sent via email earlier this week to provide you time to read them in advance of today's meeting. Are there any corrections, or is there a motion to approve the minutes of the January 29th, 30th, and 31st, 2020 FVA Advisory Committee meeting as presented?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Wright made the
Recommendation.
seconded by Mr. O'Reilly. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, motion passes, 8 yeas, 0 nays. That brings us to agenda item number 4, discussion and action on recommendations to the Commission for the 2020-2021 Veterans County Service Officer funding. Before we begin discussion of the recommendations, I'd like to ask Mr. Bracken to review the grant review and approval process, which applies to all grant applications we are considering today, and briefly explain the discussion materials in your binders the staff prepared for our meeting. Mr. Bracken, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I'd like to again thank the committee and the FVA staff for their tireless work. Let me move this microphone closer. For their tireless work through this grant application process. This meeting is a culmination of countless hours of reading, considering, scoring, and ranking worthy projects to help veterans and their families across the state of Texas. All the applications each received meticulous attention by everyone who read them. The 2020-2021 requests for applications for all the FVA grant programs were approved by the Texas Veterans Commission at their August 8, 2019 regular meeting. They were posted to the Texas Veterans Commission website and our new GovGrants portal on August the 25th, 2019. The FVA staff hosted informational webinars for potential applicants on August 22nd, September 19th, September 20th, September 24th, and October 16th, 2019, and then placed a recording of all of those webinars on the FVA website for on-demand access by all potential applicants. Applications were due on October 25th at 5 p.m. 2019 through the GovGrants portal. Madam Chair, overall 205 applications were received. requesting almost $44 million. 171 applications totaling $37.9 million were deemed eligible for evaluation. Each eligible application was assessed for risk by the FVA staff and then reviewed and scored by 3 different and independent FVA staff members using an evaluation rubric, which resulted in a rating of that application as outstanding or commendable or satisfactory or below average or unsatisfactory. The advisory committee members were provided with the evaluated application materials in January of 2020, just a few months ago, to prepare for the meeting, the application presentation meeting held on January 29th, 30th, and 31st. A total of 109 applicants presented their projects to your committee over that 3-day meeting. Committee members' individual funding recommendations were due to the FVA staff by March the 4th, 2020. Those recommendations have been rolled up and compiled and provided today in several formats to aid in your discussion today as you vote for recommendations. The request for application for each of the grant categories indicated that we anticipated $28.3 million available for this grant year. That was based on a revenue projection from the Texas Veterans Commission Finance Officer back in May of 2019. The revenue projection was revisited in January of 2020 and was adjusted upward from $28.3 million to $30 million for this grant cycle. The commission was informed at their February 11th regular meeting that there would be a $30 million grant award opportunity for this grant cycle. At their August 8th, 2019 regular meeting, the Texas Veteran Commission directed FVA to use the total amount that was requested on eligible applications to allocate the funding available to provide an even opportunity for applications across all the categories. Based on a recent release of the Texas Senate's Veteran and Border Security Committee's interim charges for the next legislative session, Veteran Treatment Court, Veteran Mental Health and Homelessness, as well as veteran health care will be key items for consideration by the next Texas legislature. Given that the opportunities were not distributed evenly across our categories, rather, Veteran Treatment Court grants received 90% opportunity, while the General Assistance, Housing for Texas Heroes, and Mental Health grant opportunities remained equal at 78%. The results are what you used when preparing your individual recommendation, and the only exception for VCSO funding, which is kept at the statutory minimum, resulting in a greater opportunity for those. So for the benefit of the public, I'll review those amounts now. For the 2021 VCSO officer grant opportunity, a 5% bylaw minimum of the total opportunity shall be made available. What that means is 5% of $30 million, which is $1.5 million. Only 6 county VCSOs applied for the VCSO exclusive opportunity, resulting in the funding request amount less than $1.5 million, so that category will be fully funded. Veteran Treatment Court, $3,825,000 available, which is 90% of the total VTC, Veteran Treatment Court application requests. Housing for Texas Heroes, $6 million available, which is 78% of the total housing grant requests. Mental Health, $6 million available, that's 78% of the application requests. And then General Assistance, $13 million available, which is 78% of the application requests. Today's committee recommendations will be presented to the Texas Veterans Commission on Thursday, May 14th, 2020. The commission will review the advisory committee's recs and make the final decision on awarding for these programs. The awarded grants will begin on July 1st of 2020 and end 1 year later on June 30th, 2021. The FVA staff has provided you with a large amount of information in the books that you received, both online, and we will be handing out more information for you throughout the course of today's meeting. The roll-up sheets that will be handed out will be done in accordance with the agenda. So you've received the VCSO roll-up sheets. When we have completed the vote on those, we will hand out the next sheets for the next category. I want to just bring your attention to the roll-up sheets. So as you look at it, you'll see it's a very familiar document, left to right on the column headers, the application ID, the grant program, organization name, the amount, all those are familiar. You'll notice some italicized, bold organizational names. Those italics represent that that particular organization or entity has a second or a third application in a different category, and you'll see that in parentheses that that other category and the amount that they requested in that category is there for your quick reference. The columns of average rank and then number of recommends out of 9, these documents that you will see will show which order they are sorted in. So first by number of recommends and then by the average rank within that block of number of recommends. So in that way, all of your rankings played a very key part in simplifying the aggregate score and strength of each of the applications. Okay. Each committee member had the opportunity to recommend a different amount of funding than was requested by the applicant. If a committee member recommended a different amount, this meeting today is the time to bring that up for discussion. The FVA Operations Manager, Michael Bardis, will call the committee's attention to where funding recommendations were made in amounts that differ from the application. Also included in the roll-up summary is information such as the priority service as directed by the commissioners, the geographic area, the service category, and the projected number of clients to be served. Again, it's a very familiar format that you've all seen. The roll-up charts graphically depict applications and the roll-up by FVA Advisory Committee member ranking and recommendations. And for this VCSO category, the charts are simple because there's only 6 applications. And all 6 of those applications will be funded because, as I mentioned, the 5% minimum opportunity. So this is a simple example. Therefore, you'll see no funding cutoff line. What you do see is a green line, and that green line separates the unanimous recommendations from all the others. So on every chart, you will see a green line. I want to emphasize that these documents are meant to serve as a discussion aid and to help you develop the best recommended group of applicants to the commissioners. As you discuss and vote on the grant recommendations today, please remember that this is a meeting for the benefit of the public. To help our guests hear and understand what we're doing today, I'm going to ask you to follow some business rules here. That is, number 1, please speak into the microphone so that the members of the public can hear your discussion clearly. This includes your YouTube audience later when we post the video. Number 2, please try to avoid side conversations at the table. Everyone needs to hear everyone speak. Number 3, when you vote, please raise your hand and leave it until the staff has recorded all the votes, and then we can proceed to the next item. Number 4, Remember that all discussion must be completed before a vote is made. Number 5, we have staff available logging the recommended amounts as we go. So Mr. Bardis and Mr. Diggs over at this table, they are keeping the running total. Irv Leos in the audience will be able to assist you in anything that any question you may have. Julie Dillard will be able to pull up the applications in GovGrants and answer any very specific thing that comes to discussion about an application, its project scope, its budget, or whatnot. And Elizabeth Webster, sitting up front, will be driving the screens, displaying maps and describing those maps. So we are here to support you get through this vote. The last thing I'd like to mention here is, as a general reminder, discussion among ourselves and among each other involving grants stays in this room. We are not allowed to speak to anyone in the public about this deliberative process until after the commission has made their award decisions in May. And that also implies that all of the materials that you have are going to be left with us today, because those materials are not releasable to the public until after the commission votes or the commission awards. So, Madam Chair, I'll hand the meeting back over to you. Thanks for your patience.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bracken. The applications for the Veteran County Service Officer funding are submitted on the General Assistance, Housing for Texas Heroes, or Veterans Mental Health applications as appropriate, and distinguished by the project manager being the Veterans County Service Officer providing services in their county. This year, all VCSO applications are General Assistance projects. If you haven't done so already, please silence your cell phones before we begin voting. Jim, thanks for mentioning the funding priorities outlined in the request for applications. For the record, I'd like to reiterate the Texas Veterans Commission's priorities and their guidance to our advisory committee with respect to all FVA grants. The guidance includes develop funding recommendations that will ensure widespread distribution of grants across the state, develop funding recommendations that encourage a diversity of services provided within geographical regions, give priority to fund the grant applications rated as outstanding, and fully fund all applications whenever possible. I'd like to ask if there is any committee member who has a conflict with any of the applicants being considered for funding. Nothing heard. Per the State Commission's conflicts of interest policy, we have all signed an acknowledgement. If you have a conflict with an applicant being considered for funding, you must recuse yourself from the entire discussion and recommendation process for that grant category. I want to reiterate that all discussions by committee members regarding the grant applications are limited to this room. As Mr. Bracken mentioned, all application information and materials remain confidential until the Texas Veterans Commission makes their awards at their May 2020 meeting. FVA staff will collect any application materials from you at the end of this meeting. Mrs. Webster, would you please describe the VCSO map you have displayed for the committee members?
Thank you, Mrs. Reyna. So right up here on the screen, we have the Veterans County Service Officer applicants, all of them displayed on a single map. I also have a map of the applicants, your recommendation, the recommendations committee before this meeting, broken out by service category. So we have financial assistance, supportive services, and also transportation, if you'd like to take a look at those individually.
All right, any questions? Thank you, Elizabeth. Mr. Bardis, please let the committee know if there were any VCSO applications received the funding amount that differs from the organization's application. Committee members, on the roll-up sheets provided to you, please make appropriate notes on the applications as Mr. Bardis describes those different recommended amounts. We will be discussing those different amounts when we get to those specific applications. Sir.
Yes, Madam Chair, there was a recommendation to recommend $300,000 for Hidalgo County VCSO.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Bartis. At this point, I will call for a 2-minute break in place to give the committee members a chance to review the VCSO funding application information provided before we get down to the business of discussing the recommendations. The FBA staff is available for questions as you look over the materials. Yes, sir.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Wright.
quick question. And I'll assume this will go through for all roll-ups that we get. What is the significance? 2 of the grant requests are bolded with a number out beside them.
Yes, please, Mr. Bracken.
So the significance of that, and you'll see that same indication on all of the roll-up sheets, what that represents is that in this particular case, the Hayes County Commissioners Court or the Hayes County government, they have another application in for the Veteran Treatment Court in that amount. So that italics and bold tells you visually that this particular entity has multiple applications in other categories.
Excellent. And thanks for providing that additional information.
Okay, does anyone need a break?
Have a question
Go ahead,
also.
sir.
With regards to grant award amount maximums, is there a policy or statutory limit that can be awarded to a single applicant?
Yes, there are.
Please, yes.
So to elaborate on that, in the request for applications for each of the grant categories, the limits to what an applicant can request were outlined pretty specifically, and I'm going to give you some examples. In the general assistance category, you cannot request more than $300,000 unless you are declared and self-declared as being a statewide service. So if you are not indicating statewide and you ask for more than 300,000, that would be something that the committee would need to consider. We will have one of those in the next few categories. So Julie, did you have something you wanted to add?
A question. This is a VCSO general assistance,
That's correct.
so would the same rules apply?
The rules do not apply to VCSOs. In the opportunity, they are allowed to request up to $500,000 for any of the general assistance categories that the VCSO is applying for. So they are an exception to that GA statewide $500,000 rule. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Any other, yes, Mr. Ball?
To continue in that line, just one question, maybe you clarified it and I didn't understand it. That's per category, but what Barry was speaking to, or at least what I'm asking is, if you have multiple grants in there, grant requests, is there a maximum limit that one agency can have if they went through all of the categories and submitted?
No, sir. Their
Okay.
limits, they do not have an aggregate limit.
Thank you.
They only have a limit within each category to which they're applying based upon the geographic area that they are serving. The other example is mental health. You do not have to be declared as a statewide entity serving mental health clients in order to ask for $500,000. So that limitation does not apply. Okay?
Any other questions? Nothing heard? Now let us begin with the 2020-2021 Veterans County Service Officer Grant discussion and recommendations. There are 6 applications this year requesting $1.175 million. All 6 applications were deemed eligible for evaluation. $1,175,000 was set aside for these grants. Based on the committee members' preliminary rankings, 5 of the 6 applications were unanimously recommended for funding, while 1 of the applications received less than 9 member recommendations. As we've done in the past, I would like the committee to consider reviewing the applications by the number of recommendations received. For instance, the committee would discuss, and then, if it is the committee's wish, vote to approve all organizations that received 9 unanimous recommendations as one motion. In the interest of time, I would suggest that we continue that approach for organizations that receive 8 out of 9 committee votes, and then 7 out of committee votes, and so on. At a distinct point, as the committee reviews, discusses, and votes on applications in each category, we will have to shift to discussing and voting on applications one by one until we have voted on all the applications that can be funded with the current revenue projection. This year, we will not stop at voting on all applications when the funding limit has been reached. Instead, we will continue beyond the funding limit to make sure that we as a committee can provide the commissioners with the recommended, ranked, and proposed funding amount for all applications in each category. It is that reason we provided a ranked order of 100% of the applications in each category to the FBA staff last week. When we complete the deliberations and voting for each grant category, here is what we will have prepared for the commissioners. 1, recommended list of organizations and funding amounts to award in May 2020 based on the projected funding set aside for each category, in all categories totaling at least $30 million. Recommended list of organizations, rank ordered by committee vote, and funding amounts for the applications that fall below the known available funding limit in each category. The purpose of discussing, voting, and rank ordering all applications in each category is to provide input to the commissioners in support of the May grant award meeting, if additional funding becomes available between then and now. Are there any comments, thoughts, or discussion? Nothing heard? Is there a motion to recommend full funding of the VCSO organizations that received the unanimous recommendations from the committee members during our preliminary ranking process?
I would make that recommendation, ma'am.
All right, recommendation by Mr. Ball.
I'll second that.
All right, second that. Is there any, oh, it was second by Mr. Wallace. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? No opposed. Motion passes, 8 yeas and 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, what that vote represents is that the Harris County Community Services Department, with a grant application of $300,000, the Hayes County VCSO with a grant application of $100,000, the Liberty County Veteran Service Office for a grant amount of $50,000, the Caldwell County VCSO application grant request of $75,000, and the Hidalgo County VCSO application totaling $500,000.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. The remaining VCSO organization received less than 9 recommendations from the committee members for funding. Is there a motion to recommend full funding of the VCO organization that has less than 9 recommendations from the committee members during our preliminary ranking process? The funding amount of this one VCSO organization is $150,000. Motion by Mr. Wright. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by, or seconded by Mr. Harrison. Is there any discussion? No discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes, 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, that vote reflected that Webb County Veteran Service Office would receive be recommended for a grant in the amount of $150,000.
Thank you. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the 2020-2021 Veterans County Service Officer grant recommendations made by the committee to take to the commission for approval. Is there a motion? Motion made by Mr. Erig. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. O'Reilly seconds. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any nays? Okay, motion passes. 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me to make a comment here about the VCSO recommendation, applications. Based on a review of the committee's reviewed, evaluated, and ranked applications, and the nature of our GovGrants software, I wanted the committee to be aware that when a VCSO or a county employee who is acting in the capacity of the VCSO, when they submit an application in GovGrants, they have an opportunity in their application to declare that their application is going to be for a veteran county service officer opportunity or to not declare that. So it's a very conscious, it's not a hidden, it's a very deliberate decision that they make when they apply. Do I want to apply as a VCSO or do I want to apply as just a county official? So I wanted to point out to the committee that when we get to the general assistance category, you will notice that there are veteran county service officer grant applications that are in the general assistance category, but as they applied, they did not apply for the VCSO opportunity. They elected to apply among a larger pool of applicants. And I wanted to make sure that the committee was aware of that and that when later we discuss the general assistance, you will see county veteran service officer applications. I don't want you to be confused at that point that somebody was left out of your vote. Okay? So, Madam Chair, thank you for that moment.
Mr.
Can I ask
Eager.
you a question?
Yes.
Do we know why they did that?
No, sir.
Because it makes more, like, maybe it's a misunderstanding of how they understand the grant application's availability. Right, because you're saying in this category, they can choose any priority they want, right? Specifically, you said?
That's correct.
Okay.
So it's speculation, but for the public and for the benefit of the record, I'll just make this comment. We had 5 webinars in the course of about 10 weeks and invited all of the potential applicants, including we having a special webinar exclusively scheduled and invited all the county veteran service officers in the state. And at these 5 webinars, we described this in great detail. How to submit the application, how to fill it out, what to click, what not to click, what you need to put in the project narrative, how to build your budget, how to make your words back up your project, how to sell it. And when we had that webinar for the county veteran service officers, we encouraged them to apply as a VCSO because of the 5% set aside legislative prerogative that they have. So, Mr. Eric, I have no idea why they would not. I just know that they did not.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I'd just like to ask you to confirm what I think I just heard. If a county chooses not to apply as a county or veteran service officer, then they are not given the same, I guess, priority or emphasis from the commissioners. They're just another general assistance application. Is that correct?
Mr. Harrison, that's a very delicate stance. It's between the letter and intent. So we know that the legislature has said 5% of the available funding shall be made available in an opportunity for VCSOs. The only way that we can ask our applicants to delineate what position they are applying for is through our application process when we ask them to self-declare as a VCSO. Now, If later they are not awarded because they did not go with the VCSO declaration, it will be a discussion of spirit versus intent versus what's in writing. So to answer your question, you apply with 78 of your contemporaries for an opportunity in general assistance, and the strength of your application stands where it stands in comparison to your competitors. This is a competitive grant. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I have one follow-up on a more general note. You mentioned earlier that the 5% of 30 million is 1.5 million. Based on what we've just voted on, we've only allocated, I think, 1.175, right? So does the additional 325 or 425, whatever it is, math in public, does that go over into the other categories now? Or is that just held in abeyance until next grant cycle?
It is back into the larger number of $30 million. So we are going to, across all the opportunities, result in a recommendation of $30 million, or actually a little greater than $30 million. So it will be accounted for in other categories.
Any other questions? All right, Mr. Bracken, thank you for the FBA's attention to detail on reviewing the applications, especially thanks to the FBA staff for looking out for the interests of Texas Veteran Commission's most important partners, the county veteran service officers in the state of Texas. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, to reiterate for the record, I would like to brief out the committee's recommendation for VCSO funding. 6 applications totaling $1,175,000 in grant funding has been unanimously voted on here by the members to move forward to the commission for award decision. Thank you.
All right. The next agenda item is the discussion and action and recommendations to the commission for the 2020-2021 Veterans Treatment Court grants. Will the FBA staff distribute the roll-up application list for the VTC applications? While those are being handed out, Mrs. Webster, please show the map of the VTC coverage based on the committee members' preliminary rankings.
Thank you.
All right, here we have 2 maps that I'm going to show you. Let me take off some of these labels. This will make a lot more sense once I have the labels off. Okay, there we go. And for the record, I can also bring back the county names whenever we need, if you need to cross-check your knowledge.
You'll have an opportunity, Ms. Webster.
Okay, thank you.
Can you maximize that, please?
Yes.
Maximize the screen.
So this is the Veterans Treatment Court. All of the recommended applicants. This is not all of the eligible. We also have 1 renewal potential grant. Okay. All right. Going back here. This is the map also that's in your binder that shows where everyone is. So we have 1 statewide application. That's why you have the slight shading on all of the the counties in the state, but we have a heavier emphasis on just the counties that have a single application or 2 applications in place. So, any questions?
Okay, 19 applications were received requesting a total of $4,305,000. All 19 applications were deemed eligible for evaluation. A total of $3,825,000 was set aside for these grants, which is 90% of the total funding for all 19 eligible applications. Again, as we begin our funding recommendation discussion, I would like to reiterate the Commission's guidance to the advisory committee with respect to the Veterans Treatment Court grants. The guidance includes developing recommendations that will ensure wide distribution of grants across the state, given priority to funding outstanding rated grant applications and fully funding applications whenever possible. Are there any committee members who have a conflict of interest with any of the Veteran Treatment Court applicants being considered for funding? Nothing heard. Per the Commission's conflict of interest policy, we have all signed in an acknowledgement if you have a conflict with an applicant being considered for the Veteran Treatment Court funding, you must recuse yourself from the entire discussion and recommendation process. Ms. Webster, I believe you described the VTC map, ma'am?
So this is your recommendation right here, this map here, where you see 1, 2, and 3 on the side. 1 means we have that one statewide applicant everywhere. The VTC eligible is the map that was in your binder. This shows all of the applicants, but I backed off the statewide so you can really see more where the regionals cover. So.
Any questions? All right, thank you, Mrs. Webster. Mr. Bardis, please let the committee know if there are any of the VTC applications received a funding amount that differs from the organization's application. Committee members on the roll-up sheets provided to you, please make appropriate notes on the applications as Mr. Bardis describes those different recommended amounts. We will be discussing those different amounts when we get to those specific applications. Mr. Bardis.
Madam Chair, there was a recommendation to recommend $250K to Panhandle Community Services. And a recommendation of $150K to Salvation Army Waco.
We're in the VTC, Mr. Bardis.
I kept looking too, where?
He's on the wrong page.
Yep, we're good. Yep, we're good.
We're all good.
Madam Chair, Collin County, recommendation of $400K. Bexar County misdemeanor, recommendation of $200K. Bexar County felony, recommendation of $75K. Dallas County CSCD, a recommendation of $400K. Galveston County, recommendation of $200K. That is all the recommendations, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Bardis. For the record, so that we're very clear, it was Bear County, which is BXAR, was noted as Bexar, but it's just for the record, we all know it's Bear County. It's okay, Mr. Bardis. I did it 100 times when I first moved here, so we're good. Okay, I call for a 2-minute break in place to give the committee members a chance to review the Veterans Treatment Court application, information provided by the FVA staff. The staff is available for questions after you look over these materials. Yes, Mr. Wright.
Quick question, 2 questions, actually. Would you explain the significance, and this may be for Mr. Bracken, of the red line, and then eligible for renewal? I'm not sure I've ever seen that, but if I have, I've slept since then.
Nope, you haven't, Mr. Wright. Mr. Bracken.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you're going to see on both the Veteran Treatment Court roll-up sheet and the General Assistance category roll-up sheet, you're going to see at the bottom an existing grant organization that is by their Q2 performance. They're doing very well, and they're on the pace to be eligible for renewal. The committee will not be discussing or voting on any renewals.
No.
This is so that we in FVA can create one document and have a global look at all of the moving parts in one picture. So to answer your other question about the green and red line, the green line again separates the unanimous votes, preliminary votes from the others. And the red line is where the allocated funding stopped. Now, did that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Do we need a further break? All right. There are 13 of 19 applications that received the unanimous recommendations for funding totaling $3,175,000. Is there a motion to recommend full funding of the VTC organizations that received unanimous recommendations from the committee members during our preliminary ranking process?
I'll make that motion.
All right, Mr. Ball makes the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Wallace is the second.
Yep.
Is there any additional discussion? Yes, Mr. Harrison.
A note on full funding, when I look at the historical performance of the Bear County Veteran Treatment Court, they do a great job of hitting their service target, but they historically underspend. So maybe the committee should consider that past performance and adjust their recommended funding. Or from full level to something less that could have opened the door to other applicants before funding runs out.
What is your suggested amount?
For the misdemeanor court, my recommendation was 200,000.
Okay.
And I think the felony court is a new applicant, but or maybe not, but I also recommended reducing theirs to 75.
Yes, Mr. Ebert. Thank you,
Just
Mr.
got a comment
Harrison.
on that. So you can't lump both courts into one discussion. They're both separate entities. You're lumping it into one as Bear County, two separate courts. One's felony, one's misdemeanor. They operate independently. So
Right.
trying to have a funding recommendation that reduces both it's a moot subject that doesn't even apply to your analysis there. I'm just putting that out there. Plus felony court, I can tell you, has been in existence. This is only the second year. And normally, based on last year, I think they performed, when they hit quarter three, was a large preponderance of their clients. I'm assuming based on exiting, incarceration or whatever other factors taking place on that too.
Mr. Ball?
I'd also like to add a couple points, going along with what's already been said. The past performance that we're looking at is really only two quarters. And many entities do not operate linearly, as was just described by Bobby. The other part too is remembering that the commissioners, one of their priorities is to fully fund. So when you look at both of those, I would still submit my movement going forward to fully fund all of those that have 9 votes for the board. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Wallace?
And I want to kind of jump on what Mr. Bracken had mentioned, what was it, at the last meeting we had, that each application is different. It's not combined with the same application for each one. Each application is completely different and should not be recommended as a group.
Just for the
Concur.
record,
Yes, Mr. Harrison?
my recommendation was not grouping them together, just looking at the performance of both. And I did not look at the current year performance. I looked at previous years when I'm trying to figure that out. How they can service, over 100% of their target population while only spending, less than 50% of the grant seems like we're removing funds from other organizations that could have used it.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Noted. Are there any other comments, discussion? All
Madam
right.
Chair.
Yes, Mr. Wright.
Unfortunately, staying in Bear County, but dealing with the Commissioners Court, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't note that they are showing zero expenditures, but they have already hit 200% of their performance numbers, just as a matter of record. I would suspect, pure speculation on my part, they're just slow in their paperwork, but they're doing the work.
Noted, Mr. Wright. Is there any other discussion? All right, with that, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes, 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, the vote that just occurred for the unanimous preliminary applications results in El Paso County VTC recommended for $300,000, Collin County VTC recommended for $500,000, Webb County 406 District Court recommended for $300,000, Bexar County misdemeanor recommended for $250,000, Travis County recommended for $50,000, Bexar County Commissioners Court, which is the felony VTC, recommended at $150,000, Montgomery County Veterans Treatment Program at $200,000, Nueces County Supervision and Corrections Department, $75,000, Dallas County Community Supervision and Corrections Department recommended at $500,000, Hayes County VTC at $300,000, McClellan County VTC at $150,000, Comal County VTC recommended at $150,000, Galveston County VTC recommended at $250,000. Madam Chair, that is the full list that were included in that vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. Mr. Bardas. Okay. The funding balance for the applications after that expenditure is $650,000. Do you concur, sir?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bardas. The remaining 6 VTC applications received 8 or fewer recommendations out of 9 from the committee members. We will address those organizations one by one. Is there a motion to recommend funding of Tarrant County VTC in the amount of $300,000?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Wright, seconded.
Second.
Mr. Ehrig, additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? Aye. 8 yeas. All those opposed? 0 yeas. Motion passes. 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken?
Madam Chair, the vote that just occurred was for Tarrant County Veteran Treatment Court at $300,000. It is so noted as a recommendation to the Commissioners.
Mr. Bardas, the remaining funding balance, sir?
Madam Chair, the remaining funding balance is $350K.
Thank you, sir. Nueces County VTC in the amount of $300,000. Is there a motion? Motion by Mr. Ehrig. Is there a second? Mr. Harrison. Additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, the vote was for Nueces County VTC for a total of $300,000. That will be what is recommended to the Commissioners.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bardas, remaining funding balance, sir, $50,000, correct, sir?
Yes, Madam Chair, remaining funding balance is
Thank you, Mr.
$50,000.
Okay, Brazos County VTC in the amount of $300,000. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Wright, is there a second? Mr. E-Reg. Additional discussion?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Wright.
In the past, when we have started to go over funding, staff has normally given us a projected number of about how far we can go over.
Correct?
So about how far can we go over?
Yes, because if, correct me if I'm wrong right now, Mr. Bartis and Mr. Bracken, if my public math is still going all right here, we're up 325,000 from the 1.5 million that was set aside for the VCSOs. So we probably are up about 375,000. Would you agree with that math, sir?
Madam Chair, yes. When you consider the large number of $30 million and how that will be apportioned across the opportunities and categories, that is correct. There is currently a surplus of funding as left over from the VCSO opportunity. So,
And further that discussion, correct me if I'm wrong, in the overall priorities, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the commissioners had veteran treatment courts as a priority for funding? No?
Madam Chair, there is, in accordance with the request for applications, there was no particular priority placed on VTC, Veteran Treatment Court programs, ahead of other categories.
Okay.
So Veteran Treatment Court as a category in and of itself is not either a higher priority or a lower priority than, for example, the Housing for Texas Heroes or the General Assistance categories. They are all equal opportunities, and we distribute the available funding across those categories based on the Commissioner's guidance. That said, I would ask that the committee consider exceeding that limit by at least one, if not two grant applicants, so that we have, and I'm going to use this word, introduce it, informal term, we have depth, we have an additional one or two grant applications that have been reviewed and voted on and agreed by this committee as a recommended entity if funding becomes available. So if we get more than $30 million, if the lottery takes off and we have more revenue, our commissioner's guidance is going to be to use that additional revenue and award that revenue, that grant opportunity. So for that reason, Madam Chair, I believe you should go one or two, at least one or two applications and vote on them for recommended funding beyond that limit,
Okay.
if that makes any sense.
It does make sense to me. I just want to get further clarification. In your initial readout, you did ask us to vote on all of them, to give them all, every application
Right.
ranked.
That's correct.
Okay, so no matter what, we'll still have to go down.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Walls.
Okay, so back to your comment, you said applicant. Recommended additional applicant, one or two applicants. I know you didn't mention how much funding that applicant is asking for at that point. So I guess to me right now, if I looked at this right here and you wanted me to say, okay, I want to vote for Brazos County, that standpoint, I would go back and recommend the last three.
Okay.
See where I'm
Right.
going? Okay,
I have the discussion,
go.
but we have a motion on the floor.
Okay, okay.
So we'll have to, I recognize you here in a minute. So the way I understand Robert's rules, we have to vote on this motion. We're still in discussion. Yes, Mrs. Webster.
For the record, it's Brazoria County, not Brazos County.
Thank you. All right. Is there any additional discussion? Okay, so what there was, motion was brought up by Mr. Wright for Brazoria County in the amount of $300,000. It was seconded by Mr. Erig. We had the additional discussion. All those in favor? Aye. So we have 8 yays. And do we have any nays? 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, the vote reflects that the committee votes 8-0 that Brazoria County Veteran Treatment Program be recommended for a grant in the amount of $300,000.
Mr. Bardis, the funding balance for the VTC applications now then, sir? Okay, we're over 250,000. All right. Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
ma'am.
Okay, City of Dallas VTC in the amount of 100,000. Is there a motion?
No, ma'am, but I have discussion before we get to a motion, because then we'd have the motion, we wouldn't be able to discuss it.
Okay, but I've called for a motion, so is there anyone to bring the motion to the floor? All right, Mr. Erig,
Make a motion that we recommend funding.
all right, is there a second? Okay, motion fails right now. Mr. Ball.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, when I look at the bottom three, and according to the guidance, we're going to take a look at prioritizing all the way to the end. We have 3 proposals that are below the red line, which means they were not recommended for funding. And as we look at those across the board, you can see that they're all satisfactory. One is high risk. But Williamson County, when you take a look at it, over to the far right on the different columns for percent of funding and percent of overhead for salaries and fringe, looks fairly satisfactory to me, as well as the number of clients to be served. My recommendation would be, given the low cost and high payoff of Williamson County, that we would vote on Williamson County to be the next one, or the first below the red line to be voted upon.
Mr. Wright.
A point of order. And I completely agree with Mr. Ball. All of these were in fact recommended to be funded by a supermajority of our committee. So just in the wording of, they were in fact recommended, they are below the red line because that's just where the line fell out to fully fund. Small point, but I just want to be, if anybody is listening in the future, every one of these grants were in fact recommended to be funding by the committee.
I hear what you say, but I brought the motion to the floor for the City of Dallas, and the motion failed. No one even seconded it. So with that, I believe the point of order would be next, then we go down to the next applicant. Okay? So at this point in time, this motion failed. So we would move on to the next one.
Okay.
All right, so for the record, City of Dallas, VTC, it was Mr. Erig brought the motion. However, no one seconded, so the motion fails, so we will move on to the next one. All right, so Williamson County, or Mr. Bracken, application vote and result, please, sir.
Madam Chair, as you mentioned, the motion failed, so there will be nothing to recommend to the committee, to the commission at this point regarding this application.
All right, Mr. Bardis, we're still $250,000 over, correct, sir?
Yes, Madam Chair.
All right. Williamson County Veterans Treatment Court in the amount of $30,000. Do I have a motion? Mr. Ball, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Erig, additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? 0. Motion passes with 8 yeas and 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, the recommendation to the commission is for Williamson County VTC in the amount of $30,000. And again, as we have mentioned, At this point, we are making recommendations in terms of identifying a rank order of additional organizations if funding becomes available, because we have already met our funding limit.
Thank you. Mr. Bartis concur, we're $280,000 over, sir?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bartis. All right. Hidalgo County CSCD in the amount of $100,000. Is there a motion? Mr. Wright has motions. Is there a second? Is there a second? All right.
I'll second.
All right, Mr. Harrison, additional discussion.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Ball.
I know we're gonna vote on this because we have a motion and a second. My question maybe to the staff on this discussion is, given this vote, if it becomes a majority yes vote, does that drop the city of Dallas to the bottom? Or how do we re-vote on Dallas, is my question. Dallas being city of Dallas VTC.
I think as
Mr.
Mr. Ball, I think as he mentioned that we want to probably give that particular applicant another opportunity for a motion for a vote. Even though it failed the first time, I would not have a problem with our proceedings if Madam Chair would like to go through the list and then go back up and see if there's an additional motion.
Mrs. Webster.
To everyone to please speak into the microphones.
Okay. First of all, we have a motion on the floor. Okay, so we need to address that first, okay? So with Hidalgo County, is there any further discussion?
I just wanted to point something.
Yes, sir.
On our high-risk list, they're on there because the way they wrote the grant shows unallowable salaries in this category. To me, that makes a big difference if they can't even stay within the confines of the grant fiscal requirements.
Any other discussion? All right, we'll call the vote. All those in favor? Have one. All those opposed? I have 7. Motion fails. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, the vote for Hidalgo County Community Service Supervision and Corrections Department, it was motioned to be determined if it was going to be recommended to the commission for $100,000, and the vote failed in that 1 yea against 7 nays. So that particular application will not go forward for recommendation if additional funding becomes available.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, yes, Mr. Wright.
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion to reconsider the city of Dallas in light of our discussions in the interim, to recommend them for $100,000 of funding.
Okay. Granted, Mr. Ball. Were you, oh, okay, all right. The city of Dallas, BT.
Second that.
Sorry?
I'll second the motion.
No, well, okay. But let me officially read it out, because this is, okay? All right, we're going back to the city of Dallas, Veterans Treatment Court in the amount of $100,000. Is there a motion? Motion was by Mr. Wright. Okay, is there a second? Mr. Harrison. Is there a discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, we have 7 in favor, 1 nay. Motion passes. With 7 yeas, 1 nay. Mr. Brackett.
Madam Chair, the result of that vote for the City of Dallas Veteran Treatment Court resulted in a majority recommendation to the commission for that program in the amount of $100,000. And in the sequence of its passing, in the lineup of the list that you see here on the roll-up chart, the City of Dallas, in terms of a linear list, would move down below Williamson County, but would remain above Hidalgo County because Hidalgo County was voted majoritively not to be recommended.
Noted. All right, Mr. Bardis, correct me if I'm wrong, the remaining were $380,000 over. Is that correct, sir? Concur?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
All right, at this time, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the 2021 Veteran Treatment Court grant recommendations made by the committee to take to the commission for their approval. Is there a motion? Mr. Ball, is there a second? Mr. Wallace? Is there any additional discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Mr. Wright, did I catch your hand as right? Okay.
That was nice. My
All right,
apologies.
motion with 8 yeas. Are there any nays? Okay, motion passes with 8 yeas and 0 nays. Mr. Brackett.
Madam Chair, for the record, here is the readout from the Veteran Treatment Court category. The unanimous vote of the first 13, which had 9 of 9 votes, those 13 will be presented forward to the commission for funding approval or consideration as they are linear listed on the roll-up sheet. Subsequent to that, we will have a total of 18 of the 19 applications that are recommended to the commission for awarding. Based upon the vote, after the unanimous votes from the preliminary review, we will have Tarrant County for $300,000, Nueces County for $300,000, Brazoria County for $300,000, Williamson County for $30,000, and City of Dallas in the amount of $100,000. And those combined with the 13 9 of 9s result in 18 of 19 recommendations. Madam Chair, any questions?
No. All right, the next agenda item is the discussion and action on recommendations to the Commission for the 2020-2021 Housing for Texas Hero Grants. I asked the FBA staff to distribute the roll-up applications list for Housing for Texas Hero Grant applications. While those are being handed out, Mrs. Webster, please show the map of the Housing for Texas Heroes coverage based on the committee members' preliminary rankings.
All right, on the screen now, you have a map of where all of the eligible applicants have a service area. Next up, I'm going to show you the home modification map. Also take off all those labels so you can actually see. Zoom out a little. And if you want me to zoom in and show you more detail somewhere, I'm happy to do so. The darker shade indicates there are more applicants that serve that county. So, for example, in the center right here, that you have more applicants than serving this county right here. Next up, we have homeless support, homeless veteran support. This is the map for homeless veteran support. You can see, just kind of panning around so you can see what's going on here. And then veteran homelessness prevention. Take off that label. As previous, here is that map for veteran homelessness prevention. This is your recommendations from the first round. So veteran homelessness prevention. Zoom out so you can see the whole state. Homeless veteran support. Zoom out so you can see the whole state. Got that label. And then home modification assistance. You can see the whole state. Any questions?
Thank you, Ms. Webster. Okay, 34 applications were received requesting a total of $8,275,000. 32 of those 34 applications totaling $7,825,000 were deemed eligible for evaluation. A total of $6 million was set aside for these grants, which is 78% of the total funding for all 32 eligible applications. As we begin our funding recommendation, I'd like to reiterate the Commission's guidance to the Advisory Committee with respect to the Housing for Texas Hero grants. This guidance includes developing recommendations that will ensure widespread distribution of grants across the state, given priority to the funding of the service category of home modification assistance, developing recommendations that encourage a diversity of services provided within geographical regions, given priority to funding outstanding rated grant applications, and fully funding applications whenever possible. Are there any committee members who have a conflict of interest with any of the Housing for Hero grant applications being considered for funding? Nothing heard. Per the Commission's conflict of interest policy, we have all signed in acknowledgement. If you have a conflict with an applicant being considered for Housing for Texas Heroes grant funding, you must recuse yourself from the entire discussion and recommendation process. Okay, Mrs. Webster has described the Housing for Texas Heroes map that's been displayed. Are there any further questions on that? Thanks again, Mrs. Webster. All right, Mr. Bardis, would you please let the committee know if any of the Housing for Texas Heroes applications received a funding amount that differs from the organization's application? Committee members on the roll-up sheets provided to you, please make the appropriate notes on the applications as Mr. Bardis describes those different recommended amounts. We will be discussing those different amounts when we get to those specific applications. Mr. Bardis.
Madam Chair, Panhandle Community Services had a recommendation of $250,000. Salvation Army Waco had a recommendation of $150,000. No more, there are no more recommendations.
All right.
What was the first one?
Would you please repeat the first one, sir?
The first recommendation is for Panhandle Community Services of $250,000.
Okay, so what I'm going to do here is call for a 10-minute break. You can take a look at everything in here. And also if you need to take care of, so.
Biology break.
Yeah, biological break. So it's 09:45 and we will reconvene at 09:55. To our audience out here, please be kindly reminded we cannot have any discussions in the hallway regarding this matter. Okay, till 09:55, we'll reconvene. Now let us begin with the 2020-21 Housing for Texas Heroes Grant discussion for recommendation. There are 15 of 32 applications that received unanimous recommendations for funding, totaling $4,200,000. Is there a motion to recommend full funding for the Housing for Texas Heroes organization that received unanimous recommendations from the committee members during our preliminary ranking process? Mr. Ball? Is there a second? Mr. Rerig? Is there any additional discussion? Yes, Mr. Wright.
I think it should be noted for the record that two of our grant requesters in that category that have all been recommended, Northeast Texas Habitat for Humanity, while they are exceeding their performance goals, they are under their financial goals, which if we're going to have a problem, that's the problem to have. but then Operation Finally Home is underperforming in both categories, just as a point of order.
Noted, Mr. Wright. Is there any other further discussion? All right, if nothing heard, all those in favor? All those opposed? Motion passes, 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, the vote reflects the following result that will be presented to the commissioners for award decision. Meals on Wheels, Central Texas, in the amount of $500,000. Northeast Texas Habitat for Humanity, $200,000. Habitat for Humanity of Smith County, $250,000. Rolling Plains Management Corporation, $300,000. Operation Finally Home, $250,000. Alamo Area Council of Governments, $300,000. CLC Incorporated, $300,000. Easter Seals Central Texas, $300,000. Community Partnership for the Homeless, $250,000. Community Action Corporation of South Texas, $300,000. The Fort Hood Area Habitat for Humanity, $150,000. Panhandle Community Services, $300,000. City of Fort Worth, $300,000. Central Texas Opportunities Incorporated, $300,000. Salvation Army El Paso, $200,000. Madam Chair, those recommendations, those 15 grant homeless Housing for Texas Hero grant applications will be forwarded to the commissioners for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. Mr. Bardis? The remaining balance is $1,800,000, sir?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
Thank you, sir. The remaining number of applications is 17 for the Housing for Texas Heroes Grant. Of the 17 remaining applications, 7 received 8 out of the 9 recommendations for funding for totaling $1,400,000. Will the committee consider voting on all 7 of these applications as a group, or do we need to discuss and vote on each applications one by one?
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Wright.
I make a motion that we vote on this tranche as a group.
Okay, so the motion's out there. Let's go ahead and we're going to recommend full funding for the Housing for Texas Heroes that received 8 out of the 9 votes for awarding during our preliminary ranking process. Is that your motion, Mr. Wright?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll second that.
All right. So Mr. Wright, Mr. O'Reilly, I know you've been raising your hand over here the whole time and you're right next to me. Thank you, sir. No, never ever, sir. All right. Is there any additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? Aye. Mr. Ball, how you vote, sir? Okay. And then all those opposed? 1. All right. No problem. Motion passes, 7 yeas, 1 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, that vote was to move 7 applicant receiving a preliminary rank of 8 of 9. Those 7 include Habitat for Humanity of Greater Garland, $250,000. The Presbyterian Night Shelter of Tarrant County, $50,000. City of Laredo, $250,000. Interfaith Action of Central Texas, $300,000. Families in Crisis, $250,000. Front Steps Incorporated, $100,000. The Salvation Army of Waco, $200,000. Operation Homefront Incorporated, $100,000.
Whoa.
Correction,
Yeah.
Madam Chair, that last one I read, Operation Homefront, is not included in the 7 that was moved and voted on.
Okay, so the last one was,
Salvation Army Waco for $200,000.
so said. All right, Mr. Bardis, now what's the remaining amount, sir? 400,000?
Madam Chair, that's correct.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bardis. All right. On Operation Homefront in the amount of $100,000, is there a motion? Mr. Ball, is there a second? Mr. Erig, additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? Okay, we have 7. Any nays or opposed?
No, I
Raise
put my
the
hand
same.
up late. I'm sorry for
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry, I did not. Okay, so let's redo the vote. All those in favor? Aye, I see 8. 8 yeas, and any nays? Okay, motion passes with 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, that vote was for recommending Operation Homefront Incorporated in the amount of $100,000. It shall be forwarded to the commissioners for approval.
Okay, next, Mr. Bardis, the remaining funding balance, 300,000, sir?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
All right, the Salvation Army, Corpus Christi, in the amount of 400,000. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve the full $400,000 for the Salvation Army of Corpus Christi.
All right, Mr. Allen, is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Ball. Additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. 8 yeas, 0 nays. Family endeavors in the amount of $300,000. Is there a motion? Mr. Erig? Is there a second? Mr. Ball? Additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? Okay, we have 8. All those opposed? 0. Motion passes. 8 yeas, 0 nays. All right, Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, the last 2 votes reflected a recommendation from this committee to the commissioners for the funding of the Salvation Army Corpus Christi in the amount of $400,000 and the funding of Family Endeavors in the amount of $300,000.
Okay, Mr. Bardis, we're over 400,000, correct, sir?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Ball.
Madam Chair, just to point out, we're already 400,000 over the allocated funding for this particular category. We still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 proposals that fall below the cut line. My recommendation would be if we could vote on those as they are, in the order that they're in. So that we can complete the list in the rank order they're in.
All right, state your motion.
My motion is that we vote as a board on the remaining applicants in the order that they're in for non-funding.
All right, is there a second? Mr. Erig? Any discussion? Mr. Wright?
And again, purely as a point of order, because I actually agree with the motion, but it should be noted that the majority of the committee did in fact vote to approve West Central Texas Regional Foundation. Just to make the committee aware of that, but if we want to vote on the remaining as one tranche, I have no objection.
Okay, and just as a note, I would just highlight that, even though two of us, or two of the committee voted for family elder care, it was one of the commissioner's priorities. So I just want to bring that up in the discussion. All right. All right, with that said, all those in favor? All right. All those opposed? 0. Motion passes with 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, that last vote indicated, as the motion was presented, there are 7 applications that fall below the remaining funding line. Those applications include, and I will read them in the order that the committee has prioritized them based upon their eligibility, and or rather based upon their application score. West Central Texas Regional Foundation for $300,000. The Salvation Army Grayson County, $150,000. United States Veterans Initiative, $300,000. Sabine Valley Regional MHMR Center, $200,000. North Texas Veterans Relief Fund, $150,000. Austin Travis County Mental Health and Mental Retardation Center, DBA Integral Care, $75,000. And Family Elder Care, $250,000.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. Mr. Bartis? The remaining were over $400,000. Is that correct, sir?
Madam Chair, that's correct. There's no change.
Thank you, Mr. Bartis. At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the 2020-2021 Housing for Texas Hero Grant recommendations made by the committee to take to the commission for their approval. Do I have a motion? Mr. O'Reilly, do I have a second? Mr. Erig. Is there any additional discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes with 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, to summarize the Housing for Texas Hero recommendation from the committee, I will read all of the names of the organizations and the amount that will be going forward to the commissioners for a funding recommendation. If I do not read the name, it is because those organizations, we do not have enough funding to address them. Meals on Wheels Central Texas, $500,000. Northeast Texas Habitat for Humanity, $200,000. Habitat for Humanity Smith County, $250,000. Rolling Plains Management Corporation, $300,000. Operation Finally Home, $250,000. Alamo Area Council of Governments, $300,000. CLC Incorporated, $300,000. Easter Seal Central Texas, $300,000. Community Partnership for the Homeless, $250,000. Community Action Corporation of South Texas, $300,000. The Fort Hood Area Habitat for Humanity, $150,000. Panhandle Community Services, $300,000. City of Fort Worth, $300,000. Central Texas Opportunities Incorporated, $300,000. The Salvation Army El Paso, $200,000. Habitat for Humanity Greater Garland, $250,000. The Presbyterian Night Shelter of Tarrant County, $50,000. The City of Laredo, $250,000. Interfaith Action of Central Texas, $300,000. Families in Crisis Incorporated, $250,000. Front Steps Incorporated, $100,000. The Salvation Army Waco, $200,000. Operation Home Front Incorporated, $100,000. The Salvation Army Corpus Christi, $400,000. And finally, Family Endeavors, DBA Endeavors, $300,000. Madam Chair, that is the recommended list that will be presented to the commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. That brings us to agenda item number 7, discussion and action on recommendations to the commission for the 2020-2021 Veteran Mental Health Grants. I asked the FBA staff to distribute the roll-up application list for the Veteran Mental Health Grant applications. While these are being handed out, Ms. Webster, would you please show the map of the VMH coverage based on the committee members' preliminary rankings?
Okay, so this is the map that is in your binders. This is all the eligible applications. But after your initial recommendations, here is the clinical counseling recommended map. Thank you. Here is the clinical counseling is also a commissioner priority. Also commissioner priority peer delivered services.
Ms. Webster is not showing.
Oh, my apologies. Let's go back and I will show you the other one.
So if you can just display the map, please, and then at some point you'll have an opportunity to discuss it further.
Okay. Here's clinical counseling.
Yeah, I think it works. That's the way we've been doing it.
Okay.
Go ahead,
Okay.
keep going, Ms. Webster.
Okay, so here's the map for clinical counseling. Take off those labels, show you the whole state. And here, this is a commissioner priority. The peer delivered services is also a commissioner priority. So let me take off those labels, show you the whole state. And then non-clinical counseling services. Again, take off those labels, show you the whole state. It's really just down here in South Texas. This is your recommendations after the first round. Non-clinical, peer delivered, and clinical.
"48 veterans' mental health applications were received requesting a total of $9,860,000, 36 applications totaling $7,740,000 were deemed eligible for evaluation. $6 million were set aside to fund these grants, 78% of the requested amount of 36 eligible applications. As we begin funding recommendation discussion for this grant program, I'd like to reiterate the Commission's guidance to the Advisory Committee with respect to the Veterans Mental Health Grants. This guidance includes developing recommendations that will ensure widespread distribution of grants across the state, giving priority to funding the service categories of clinical counseling and peer-delivered services, developing recommendations that encourage a diversity of services provided within a geographic region, giving priority to funding outstanding rated grant applications, and fully funding applications whenever possible. Are there any committee members who have a conflict of interest with any of the veterans' mental health applicants being considered for funding? Nothing heard. Per the Commission's conflict of interest policy, which we have all signed in acknowledgement, if you have a conflict with an applicant being considered for veterans' mental health funding, you must recuse yourself from the entire discussion and recommendation process. Mrs. Webster has described the map displayed for the committee. Is there any further questions for her? Yes, Mr. Ball.
I do have a question regarding the overall listing. We have been looking at all the previous groupings and discussing how much money is available this year for funding. And yet when we get to this category, we're falling short of the recommended mark by $220,000. And I look at that and say, okay, well, maybe it's because nobody felt the rest of the applicants were valid, yet there are 4 that were voted on by the majority of the committee to be approved. So the question for the staff is, why, when we've been looking at going above and beyond based on the resources this year, this category we're cut short when there are applicants who have received a majority of the committee's votes.
Mr. Bracken.
Mr. Ball, as you're looking at that roll-up sheet, you notice that there is an arbitrary red line that depicts a separation of, or a funding cutoff line. This committee will review whether or not that red line, so to speak, should move farther down
Yes, sir.
in order to include more opportunities or to award above the $6 million category target. That said, note that the red line clearly distinguishes between a tranche of 8s, of 9s, and the rest. So let that be a visual trigger for you as you orient on what is above and below the green and the red line on that document.
Thank you for the response, sir.
Yes, Mr. Wright.
And it might be my old eyes, but we have on our financial worksheet, Bear County Commissioners Court that has applied for a VMH grant listed, but I don't see them listed on a roll-up. Bear County Commissioners Court applied for a VMH grant. And I believe they even presented it, if my memory serves.
Yeah, I don't see him on the one where,
Okay,
Different
it may very well be a typo.
I haven't.
all right, Mr. Bracken.
Mr. Wright, Bear County Commissioners Court did in fact present a grant application in January for something other than the misdemeanor and the felony VTC, and that was a general assistance grant. When we get to the next category, you will see them indicated on the general assistance.
Okay.
So what you're looking at is you're looking at the performance chart of what they currently have.
Right.
They currently have a mental health grant, but they have applied for a GA, general assistance grant, for next grant cycle.
Good. It just
Does that
should have been
answer your
typed.
question?
Yes, sir. That's what I thought.
All right. Any other, okay, questions? Thanks again, Mrs. Webster. Mr. Bartis, please let the committee know if any of the VMH applications received a funding amount that differs from the organization's application. Committee members on the roll-up sheets provided to you, please make the appropriate notes on the applications as Mr. Bartis describes those different recommended amounts. We will be discussing those different amounts when we get to those specific applications.
Madam Chair, Dallas County Community Supervision and Corrections Department has a recommendation of $100,000. Bailey Endeavors Incorporated has a recommendation of $250,000. West Texas Counseling and Guidance has multiple recommendations of $300,000. Houston Methodist Hospital has a recommendation of $250,000. Tropical Texas Behavioral Health has a recommendation of $250,000. There are no further recommendations, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bartis. At this point, I will call for a 2-minute break in place to give the committee members a chance to review the veterans' mental health application information provided by the FVA staff. The staff is available for questions as you look over the materials.
Talk to the staff about something, sorry.
All right, we ready? All right. Now let us begin with the 2020-2021 Veterans Mental Health Grant Discussion and Recommendations. There are 15 of 36 applications that received unanimous recommendations for funding totaling $3,230,000. Is there a motion to recommend full funding of the VMH organizations that received unanimous recommendations from the committee members during our preliminary ranking process?
So moved.
Mr. Wright makes the motion. Is there a second? Mr. Ball, is there any discussion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I just would like to make a point of order that these recommendations represent every region in the state of Texas to include 2 statewide grant applications. So I think overall we did a very good job following the commissioner's guidance as far as dispersal of these programs, ranging from clinical counseling services to peer delivery services.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor? Aye. We have 8 in favor. All those opposed? Motion passes. 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, the vote just captured 15 veteran mental health grant applications. I will read those applications that were in that vote. Project Amistad, $200,000. Centerpoint Incorporated, $100,000. HOT MHMR, $250,000. Dallas County Community Supervision and Corrections Department, $150,000. Collin County, $250,000. Sabine Valley Regional MHMR Center, $150,000. Centacor Foundation, $200,000. Samaritan Center for Counseling and Pastoral Care, $500,000. Family Endeavors Incorporated, $500,000. South Texas Rural Health Services, $50,000. Caritas of Austin, $50,000. West Texas Counseling and Guidance, $500,000. Volunteers of America, Texas, $200,000. Rock Ride On Center for Kids, $100,000. And the YWCA of Greater Austin, $30,000. Madam Chair, those 15 organizations will be presented to the Commission in May for recommended funding.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. Mr. Bartis, the remaining funding balance, sir?
Madam Chair, remaining funding balance is $2,770,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bartis. The remaining number of applications is 21 for the VMH grant. Of the 21 remaining applications, 10 received 8 out of 9 recommendations for funding totaling $2,550,000. Will the committee consider voting on all of these 10 applications as a group, or do we need to discuss each application one by one?
Madam Chair, I'll recommend that we vote on all 10 of those for approval.
Okay, any other comment?
Second.
Well, it's not a motion.
sorry.
No. Okay, so we'll take care of that. The only thing that I would like to point out is a couple things. City of Laredo came in at below average. And when you read the write-up, it says Some of the items on the budget are unallowable. Application will need rework. And you do have a couple that are, we have 1, 2, 3 that are showing satisfactory. And of the 3, 2 of them are part of the priority by the commission. And then I'll just say that Grace Under Fire, unrestricted net assets at the end of the year are negative $24,439. So I just bring that up to the committee. So, yes, Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, thank you for bringing out those points. The city of Laredo, receiving 8 out of 9 votes, wanted to remind the committee that if you look at exactly the amount of coverage that the Veteran Mental Health Grant Program reaches down into that part of Texas, that although it's a below average, probably not the best applicant, it does provide a critical service to a veteran population in the valley.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. All right, is there a motion to recommend full funding of the VMH organizations that receive 8 out of the 9 votes for awarding during our preliminary ranking process? Mr. Ball, is there a second? Mr. O'Reilly, is there any additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? All right, 8. Is there any opposed? All right, motion passes, 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, those 10 organizations that were voted on include Houston Methodist Hospital for $500,000, Tropical Texas Behavioral Health, $500,000, Santa Maria Hostel Incorporated, $200,000, Baylor Scott and White Research Institute, $400,000, Refuge Services Incorporated, $200,000, Marriage Management Consultants, $100,000, Easter Seals of Greater Houston, $300,000, Grace After Fire, $100,000, the Montrose Center, $100,000, and the City of Laredo, $150,000. Madam Chair, those are the 10 that will be coupled with the first group and forwarded to the commission for approval in May.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. Mr. Bardis, I see a remaining balance of $220,000. Is that correct, sir?
Madam Chair, that is correct.
All right, thank you. All right, the Austin Travis City MHMR in the amount of $500,000. Is there a motion? Yes.
Make a motion for 250.
Okay, but first it's we have to do the motion of 500,000.
Sorry.
Okay, nothing heard, then the motion fails for Austin Travis County MHMR in the amount of 500,000.
Now I did it.
We have to,
I make a motion for 250,000 for them.
right, Mr. E-Ray makes a motion for Austin Travis County MHMR in the amount of 250,000. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, seconded by Mr. Wright. Any additional discussion?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Ball.
Highlighting that one of the commissioner's priorities is to fully fund, and if you're not fully funding, then going back into the grant, a lot of the applicants may not be able to accomplish what their goals are at that funding level, which is why they requested the amount that they did. So even granting something short of 100% can oftentimes do as much harm as good for the applicant. And I'll leave it at that because I have another motion, but we got to finish this one first.
Any other additional discussion? All right, all those in favor? We have 3. All those opposed? We have 5. So motion fails with 3 yeas, 5 nays. Yes, Mr. Ball.
Madam Chairman, of all the applicants that are below the currently templated red line, there are 3, as you mentioned earlier, that were satisfactory. 1 we just voted on and voted down. There are 2 others that are satisfactory. I would like to make a motion that no matter where they're at on that listing, we take a look at those 2 satisfactory applicants before looking at the other ones.
All right, so what we'll do, Mr. Ball, is then we will go down. We'll go ahead and the next one on the line, I will need someone to, or I'll make the motion to, I'd like to make a motion for Armstrong Music Community School, Music Community in the amount of $20,000. Is there a second? All right, seconded by Mr. Wright. The motion was made by Raina. Additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? All right, there's 8 in favor. All those opposed?
Those 7 in favor.
Correction. So, all those in favor? All right, we have 7. Thank you. And all those opposed? 1. So we have 7 yeas, 1 nay. Motion passes.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Wright.
another one of my points of order.
Yes, sir.
When we go to the previous tranche, you had listed it as 8 yeas. It should have been 7. The 10, I think, well, I don't remember how many there were. 10 of 8. There were only 7 yea votes.
Okay. And were you the nay vote?
No, I was abstaining.
You abstained.
I abstained.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
That's, okay. The motion still passed.
Yes.
All right. Let the record reflect that Mr. Wright abstained on that vote for the 8 of 9 full votes. But the point of the matter is the motion did carry. Thank you, Mr. Wright. Okay, let's see. U.S. Veterans Initiative in the amount of $300,000. Do I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Wright. Is there a second? Is there a second? All right, no second. Motion fails. Family elder care in the amount of $75,000. Is there a motion? All right, motion by Mr. Ball. Is there a second? Mr. E-Rig. Additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 in favor. All those opposed? We have 1. So motion passes with 7 yeas, 1 nay. Mr. Brackett.
Madam Chair, we've had 2 votes. The first for Armstrong Community Music School at $20,000, which will be forwarded to the commissioners for funding consideration, and the other for family elder care in the amount of $75,000, which will also be forwarded for consideration funding.
All right, Mr. Bartis, the remaining funding balance, sir?
Madam Chair, remaining funding, $125,000.
All right, thank you. Okay, vet trip in the amount of $100,000. Is there?
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a different motion, since none is on the table. In light of the fact that no remaining grant request received even a simple majority of the committee, that we deal with them as a tranche, and vote against voting against recommended funding.
So what we'll do is you've made a motion, we'll vote on the motion, and then we'll proceed from there. So restate your motion, Mr. Wright.
My motion is that in light of there being less than a majority recommended funding for the remaining grantees, the motion is that we vote to not recommend funding those remaining grants.
Is there a second? Mr. Ball. So the motion was made by Mr. Wright. It was seconded by Mr. Ball. Is there a discussion? Okay, I have discussion on that. I hear what you're saying, and I see what you're saying, but I will say that two of them down there, 4 committee members did vote for, and they have yeses by the commission. And I would also bring to the committee's point that we still have 125,000. And I would say that I would bring to your attention that I think it is important to look at some of these other organizations that have, number one, the part of the commission's priority. And I do know that the FVA full-timers would have to also work with those applicants to bring them up to from whatever status they're at. So I bring that out. I think we should still strongly consider the spending or recommending a correction, 125,000. Mr. Ball, I recognize you, Mr. Bracken, but Mr. Ball.
Yes, ma'am. And just to highlight what you said, the overall rating that the staff would have to bring them up to is from an unsatisfactory condition, which is the lowest feasible rating they could have.
Noted, Mr. Ball. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, I believe it might be prudent at this point for committee members to be given a moment to look through the materials that they have, all of the reference materials regarding those applications, so that they can have time to think and contemplate on the motion. The one thing that I would point out is that one of those two applications that you, Madam Chair, indicated that serves a priority is in a region that is historically underserved. And albeit the application may not have been written very strongly, and albeit that is not a very strong application, our staff is here to work with these grant organizations once awarded to make sure they are successful.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bracken. Yes, Mr.
Can I
Eber.
ask which region is the one that you're saying is underserved?
West Texas.
2?
Yes.
Okay, so for the record, we're still in a discussion on a motion, and I'm going to grant a couple extra minutes to review the items, materials given to the committee members. All right, are we good? Okay, so, we have a motion out on the floor. Would you restate your motion, Mr. Ball?
I believe I seconded it, but
Second,
I made
Mr.
the
Wright,
motion.
correction, thank you. I knew you two were in cahoots, I didn't remember which one.
We are. I shouldn't say that, now we're on the record.
Yeah,
My motion is that in light of the fact that the remaining grant requests have not even met a majority recommendation from the committee, that we deal with them as a tranche and vote to not recommend.
all right, and then that motion was seconded by Mr. Ball. I'll let the record reflect you are not in cahoots, you vote and make motions independently, so I want to state that for the record. So we've had our discussion. Any further discussion? All right, let's call the vote. All those in favor? We have 1, 2, 3 in favor. All those that oppose? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So motion fails. 3 yeas, 5 nays. All right, so with that said, we'll just go down the list. Next one is vet trip in the amount of $100,000. Is there a motion to board? All right, nothing heard. Motion fails. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bartis, the amount still is $125,000 in the pot, correct, sir?
Madam Chair, that's correct.
All right, eQuest in the amount of $150,000. Is there a motion? I have a motion for it. Brain of motions. Is there a second? Okay, motion fails. Emergence Health Network in the amount of $300,000. Is there a motion? Mr. Erig, there is a motion.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. O'Reilly. Erig. Additional discussion. Nothing heard. All those in favor? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in favor. Is there all those opposed? 1. So motion passes with 7 yeas, 1 nay. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, that vote reflects that the committee will recommend funding for Emergence Health Network in the amount of $300,000.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, Veterans Freedom Retreat in the amount of $150,000. Is there a motion? All right, there isn't a motion. Motion fails. Triple H Equip Therapy Center in the amount of $50,000. Is there a motion? Motion by Raina. Is there a second? All right, motion fails. And for the record, we're still $175,000 in the negative. All right. Aloe Foundation in the amount of $15,000. Is there a motion? All right, motion by Mr. Ball. Is there a second? Motion by Raina, second. Additional discussion. Yes, Mr. Allen.
I believe that this grant was for veterans, but it's my understanding that this is being conducted at Camp Maybury and is open to active duty members and members of the National Guard at Camp Maybury. So it just seems to me that it's difficult for a veteran who's completed their service to receive benefits from this grant.
All right. Any other further discussion? Yes, Mr. Ball.
Madam Chair, can I ask the staff to give us a definition of a veteran?
Mr. Brack.
Madam Chair, so to answer the question, the Fund for Veteran Assistance, the Veterans Commission allows for the applicant organizations to define veteran. And what that entails is character of service, number of days served active duty or not. Are they currently on active duty or not? Are they currently active with the National Guard or Reserve Forces or not? All of those different things can be used to define veteran by that applicant organization. So in that regard, the organization at question here that the motion has been made for is certainly eligible and credible to serve active duty members and National Guard members at Camp Mabry, and that is well within the scope of our fund.
Thank you, Mr. Bracken. Any further questions or discussion? All right, then let's call the vote. All those in favor? Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 in favor. All those not opposed? All right, motion fails with, put the, all those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a tie.
Yeah, don't you have to make the tiebreaker?
Is the general counsel?
She's left her stuff here.
Can you please step out and say we need a general counsel ruling when a motion is tied?
It's 4-4, but it's time fails. I think we have to be. We can wrestle.
Call carry.
No pressure on any of the notes. Just kidding.
So this is what a standoff looks like. No, I think if given the opportunity,
Here, we have the general
I'm happy
counsel.
to be a tiebreaker.
Ma'am, we now have a tie vote on a motion.
What's the motion?
The motion is
That shouldn't matter.
that
Just curious.
it's the Aloe Foundation for $15,000.
Oh, it's for actual funding.
Yeah,
It's not just a ancillary motion.
Right,
Okay.
it's a tie vote.
It's a tie vote. Well, as we have discussed many times, Robert's Rules of Order is not the law.
Right.
You have 8 sitting, properly appointed, qualified people to vote on this motion. And I think what we would do then is we would continue to deliberate, just like a jury.
All right.
Continue to deliberate and see if anybody can be persuaded one way or another. I think that if it is a tie vote, it will ultimately fail.
All right, then.
I think that's the way it is. But again, reference to Robert's Rules of Order would not be any kind of tiebreaker or precedent.
All right, no, so I acknowledge both of you in order, Mr. Paul.
Okay, I voted for the yes, but as I continue to look down the list, if you look at Aloe Foundation, it is from the Central Region, Region 6. And as you go up the mark, there's already $1 million or more, unless I'm mistaken, voted for Region 6. So I'll put that on the table, and I'm reconsidering my vote.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ball. Mr. Harrison.
I voted no previously, but I'm noting that we're already in the red in terms of available funding. So if there was a yes vote, I think we're simply saying that this would be the next organization if funds are available to receive funding. So it's even a yes vote is not a guarantee. It's just they're the next one down the line. Am I understanding that correctly?
So noted, Mr. Harrison. All right, we'll call, yes, Mr. Allen.
And to caveat, sir, I'd like to bring up a point of order that 8 of the 11 grant applications applications for Region 6 have already been approved.
All right, with that said, we will call a revote. All those in favor? All those opposed? All right, so
Very persuasive.
all those in favor was 0. All those opposed was 8. Motion fails. With 0 yeas, 8 nays. All right. And then Austin Dog Alliance, in the amount of $300,000. Is there a motion? No motion heard. Motion fails. All right. Mr. Brackett.
Madam Chair, since the last vote for satisfactory applications, there have been no additional voted on for recommendation applications. Recommend to move on to, let's group the entire group together so I can read out the
You bet.
affirmations.
Just want to make sure, since there was so much discussion, et cetera, and I do appreciate it. At this time, I will entertain a motion to approve the 2020-2021 Veteran Mental Health Grant recommendations made by the committee to take to the commission for their approval. Is there a motion? Mr. Wright, is there a second? Mr. Ball, is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 8. All those opposed? 0. Motion passes with 8 yeas and 0 nays. Mr. Brackett.
Madam Chair, I'm going to read off all of the applications and the amounts that will be forwarded to the commission for recommendation for funding. Project Amistad, $200,000. Center Point Incorporated, $100,000. HOTR MHMR, $250,000. Dallas County Community Supervision and Corrections Department, $150,000. Collin County, $250,000. Sabine Valley Regional MHMR, $150,000. Cinecor Foundation, $200,000. Samaritan Center for Counseling and Pastoral Care, $500,000. Family Endeavors, $500,000. South Texas Rural Health Services, $50,000. Caritas of Austin, $50,000. West Texas Counseling and Guidance, $500,000. Volunteers of America, Texas, $200,000. Rock Ride-On Center for Kids, $100,000. YWCA Greater Austin, $30,000. Houston Methodist Hospital, $500,000. Tropical Texas Behavioral Health, $500,000. Santa Maria Hostel, $200,000. Baylor Scott and White Research Institute, $400,000. Refuge Services, $200,000. Marriage Management Consultants, $100,000. Easter Seals of Greater Houston, $300,000. Grace After Fire, $100,000. The Montrose Center, $100,000. City of Laredo, $150,000. Armstrong Community Music School, $20,000. Family Elder Care, $75,000. Emergence Health Network, $300,000. Madam Chair, that concludes the list that will go forward for recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bracken. All right, before we go on, does anyone need to make a quick break? No? Press? Perfect. Okay, that brings us to agenda item number 8, discussion and action on recommendations to the Commission for the 2020-2021 General Assistance Grants. I asked the FBA staff to distribute the roll-up application list for General Assistant Grant applications. And in concert, while those are being handed out, Mrs. Webster, if you would please show the map of GA coverage on the committee members' preliminary rankings.
I am pulling up those maps now. Okay, first off, this is the map that is in your books. I have also added the county names here so you can see where everything has been placed. Now, this map does not show where the statewide applicants would cover because that covers all 254 counties of Texas. This map is designed to pop out the differences in counties being served. Now, that being said, this is the recommendation of the financial assistance subcategory before this meeting. These purple counties here are the Veterans County, Veterans County Service Officers grants that were just approved in a previous section. I'll move those below here so you can also see. I'll hide them actually. So you can see what those the coverage of those counties looks like, but I can also bring them back and put them up on the screen if that will be helpful to you. So this is the financial assistance, which is a priority service category for the commissioners. Next up is supportive services, which is also a priority service category for commissioners. Sorry. Scroll out so you can see the whole state. Legal pro bono legal services is also a priority for the commissioners. And then also, not priority, but also part of the general assistance grant program for 2020, 2021 is transportation with that Veterans County Service Officer down here. Employment. This is the recommendation of the committee members after your first round of reviews. And then family services. And so we've seen financial assistance, supportive services, transportation, employment, family services, and legal. And those are the 6 service categories underneath general assistance for 2020, 2021. I'm going to go back to the all eligible map. And let me know if you need me to pan around or show you anything else.
Ms. Webster, would you please remove the county labels
Yes, sir.
from that? Thank you.
Zoom out a little bit so you can see everything here.
And just as a reminder, what we're looking at is we're looking at the density, geographic distribution and density of applicants by county boundaries within our different regions. We're looking at 100% of the GA applications that are in the entire sheet or above the funding limit or what?
This is all the eligible applicants. Here are all the recommended financial assistance applicants. Here are all the recommended supportive services. Oh, goodness. Applicants. Here are all of the legal services applicants that are recommended. And then also part of the general assistance grant program, you have transportation. Take that off. And then you also have employment services and also family services as part of general assistance. Now, the last 6 maps were the recommendations before this meeting. And the first map is all of the eligible applicants that are local and regional because statewide just covers everyone.
Okay, I'm going to ask you for the sake of what I know is on the roll-up, for the benefit of the committee, to please place the financial assistance map up there. Remove the county labels.
There we go. This is financial assistance, the recommendation.
And then help us on our screen see it clearly. Zoom out just a bit. Thank you. This represents the financial assistance applications that are above
Correct. This is
that funding limit.
the recommendation of the committee for the first. And let me back off the
Preliminary
remove.
recommendation.
Yes, correct.
Okay,
thank you, sir.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
No,
Just wanted to
we're
make
good.
sure of all categories, this is where maps really matter.
All right, and I believe you had any questions or comments for Ms. Webster? All right, Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, I wanted to bring to the committee's attention one element on this, two elements on this roll-up. Item number one, you'll recall earlier this morning, I mentioned that there were some Veteran County Service officers who applied as general assistant grant applicants, and they did not exercise their prerogative to apply as a VCSO opportunity. Those particular entities are indicated in purple. So that is what those highlighted purple organizational names are. Are there any questions on that point?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
They didn't apply as VCSO. The commission said that, make sure I get this right, all VSO in that category would be approved. But this is not that category, so that weighting or criteria from the commissioner does not apply.
That's correct.
All right.
So this is, as we spoke this morning,
Yes,
the
sir.
difference between the spirit and the letter.
Yes, sir.
So we want to fully fund every VCSO out there who is seeking grant funding. That is what we want to do, but it requires them applying for a VCSO opportunity in order to meet halfway in the middle. Now, that's the letter. The spirit is some of the VCSO applications, as you can see where they sit on this list. I would encourage the committee, as you deliberate, that you take into consideration that funding our VCSOs is a very important prerogative for the commissioners and for, again, state legislature has provided a 5% funding opportunity. So the next topic I want to bring up is you'll see the sixth item from the top. There is an organization that City of Fort Worth. You'll see that they have multiple grant applications, but what you will see in terms of the amount is you'll see the amount of $400,000. If you continue to look right across that row, you will note that they are not a statewide applicant, that they are regional, i.e. the city, and therefore the funding limit that they can request is $300,000. Now, the reason why it's $400,000 is because, admittedly, our GovGrant system does not catch those things. So this application was submitted, and it was presented in January, and it was reviewed and evaluated by you. But I am telling you at this point in time, we need to manually reduce that number from 400,000 down to 300,000, because that is, based on the request for application and our policy, the most they can get unless they are a statewide entity. Are there any questions on that point?
Nope.
Mr. Wright.
Since we have been voting by tranches, would it be possible to pull one grant out per tranche just to discuss it and then vote the remaining tranche where we have unanimously, in this case, unanimously recommended funding?
Well, it's always a possibility, and we, can sit there and name the ones that are going to be in each one, and then leave that whatever one out. But I would just say, in light of what Mr. Bracken has said, if that's what you're referring to, that 9 of 9 committee members or 8 of 9 or however the numbers all fall, I would just would like to proceed that way. If not, then we'll have to go one by one.
I understand how to make the motion. Now that you've said that, you've answered my question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, Mr. Walsh.
Mr. Bracken already indicated, though, that even though the city of Fort Worth has recommended 400,000, the rule and regulations say authorize you can only do 300,000. So I don't think there should be a discussion on just that one individual, which we already know that it's going to be dropped to 300,000, even though they recommended 400,000. So if you voted on all of them, you're recommending that information with the less $100,000. That's all there is to it. That's why I'm looking at it. So I would recommend that we vote for all, for the first priorities, the 9 recommended. I would recommend that we all vote for them together as a group and stuff, and go from there.
So noted.
Okay.
And I'll finish the readout. And then we'll go from there, and I think it will become explicit.
Okay.
And then, Mr. Bardis is always, confirming the numbers for each. So, and then if there's any further questions or feedback, we'll address it then. Fair enough?
Fair.
Any other discussion? Yes?
Not for the group, madam. I just want to point something out to you here.
Right here, you're right.
Right, so you know
Is that a correct number?
No, that needs to be.
Okay,
adjusted.
so then that's when I'll expect Mr. Bardis to
That's correct.
correct that number.
That's correct.
Thank you. Hence the discussion back. Thank you. Okay, so where was I? Okay, Elizabeth, Ms. Webster already introduced the map. 98 general assistance applications were received, requesting a total of 20.22 million or 220,000. 78 applications totaling 16,900,000 were deemed eligible for evaluation. $13 million were set aside to fund these grants, 78% of the requested amount of 78 eligible applications. As we begin our funding recommendation discussion for this grant program, I would like to reiterate the Commission's guidance to the Advisory Committee with respect to the general assistance grants. This guidance includes developing recommendations that will ensure widespread distribution of grants across the state, given priority to the funding of service categories, financial assistance, and supportive services. Developing recommendations that encourage a diversity of services provided within geographical regions, giving priority to funding outstanding rating grant applications and fully funding applications whenever policy. Are there any committee members who have a conflict of interest with any of the general assistant applicants being considered for funding? Nothing heard. Per the Commission's conflict of interest policy, which we have all signed in acknowledgement, if you have a conflict with an applicant considered for the general assistance funding, you must recuse yourself from the entire discussion and recommendation process. Ms. Webster has already described the general assistance maps. Are there any further questions? Nothing heard. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Bardis, please let the committee know if any general assistance applications received a funding amount that differs from the organization's application. Committee members, on the roll-up sheets provided to you, please make the appropriate notes on the applications as Mr. Bardis describes the different recommended amounts. We will be discussing those different amounts when we get to those specific applications. Mr. Bardis.
Madam Chair, the first recommendation is for City of Fort Worth. So in conjunction with what Mr. Bracken was saying about the City of Fort Worth, we also have a recommendation to lower the City of Fort Worth to $300K. Texas BFW Foundation has a recommendation of $250K.
Say again that organization.
Texas VFW Foundation has a recommendation of $250K, $250,000. Honor Veterans Now has a recommendation of $250,000. And Family Elder Care has a recommendation of $200,000. That's all the recommendations, Mayor.
All right. At this point, I'll call for a couple-minute break in place to give the committee members a chance to review the general assistance application information provided in your books. Before we get down to business discussing the recommendation, the staff is available for your questions as you look over the materials. Tell you what, let me recant that. Let's take a 10-minute break. Here it is now 11:15, and we'll reconvene at 11:25. I would like to remind those sitting out in the audience that we are not permitted in the hallway to discuss any matters about how we voted, how we're going to vote, or anything about the applications. So I'll see everyone back at 11:25. Thank you. Now let us begin with the 2020-2021 General Assistant Grant discussion and recommendations. There are 32 of 78 applications that received unanimous recommendations for funding totaling. How much is that total, Mr. Bardis? For the 32 of 78 applications based on Mr. Bracken's discussion with us.
$6,925,000, man.
For 32 of the 78 applications?
Are you looking above the green line, ma'am?
Yes. That's 32 of them, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So for 32 of the 78 applications, it's how much money totaling?
$6,925,000.
All right, $6,925,000. That math doesn't add up right. If you go from 400,000 to 300.
Chair, we'll work the number, we'll rework and verify.
Okay. Okay. Oh, it's important for the record. All right, Mr. Bardis, we're going to give you a minute or two to get that correct number, so we have it for the record.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We reworked the numbers. It's $7,225,000.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Bardis. So I'm going to go ahead and reread it. There are 32 of 78 applications that received unanimous recommendations for the funding for totaling $7,225,000. Is there a motion to recommend full funding of the general assistant organizations that received unanimous recommendations from the committee members during our preliminary ranking process? Mr. Wright?
Madam Chair, I would like to recommend fully funding within the limits of state law and the FBA, the top tranche of grant requests.
Okay, we had a motion out there, and I would also say that Mr. Bracken very clearly did stipulate that. And then I would also say to the committee that that's why I had the number corrected, so said, that has all that discussion that was previous to that. So, sir, we're going to go with still the original motion to recommend full funding of the general assistance organizations that receive unanimous recommendations from the committee members during our ranking process. Do I have a, okay? Wait. Mr. Wright, are you still?
I'm good with it.
Okay. All right. So who's making the motion?
I'll make it.
All right, Mr. Wright. Who is seconding the motion? Mr. Allen. Is there any additional discussion? Nothing heard. All those in favor? Aye. I have 8 in favor. Any nays? All right, motion passes with 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, I'm going to read the 32 application names and the amounts that are a part of this tranche. Caritas of Waco, $200,000. San Antonio Metropolitan Ministry, SAM Ministries, $300,000. Nueces County, $150,000. Hale County Meals on Wheels, $75,000. Lone Star Legal Aid, $300,000. City of Fort Worth, $300,000. Caritas of Austin, $75,000. El Paso County VCSO, $300,000. Project Amistad, $300,000. Interfaith Ministries for Greater Houston, $250,000. Family Service Center of Houston and Harris County, $300,000. Fort Bend Seniors Meals on Wheels and much, much more, $200,000. Meals on Wheels Montgomery County, $300,000. Salvation Army San Antonio, $300,000. Fort Bend County, $250,000. Texas A&M Research Foundation, $75,000. Easter Seals of Central Texas, $250,000. Project Mend, $300,000. Citizens Development Center doing business as Achieve, $200,000. Hidalgo County Community Service Agency, $300,000. Catholic Charities of Central Texas, $300,000. Community Services of Northeast Texas, $300,000. Hope for the Warriors, $250,000. Veterans Center of North Texas, $100,000. CLC Incorporated, $300,000. Center Point, $300,000. City of Laredo, $50,000. Foundation Communities, $200,000. Community Council of South Central Texas Incorporated, $300,000. Katy Christian Ministries, $150,000. The Salvation Army Grayson County, $100,000. And Bring Everyone into the Zone, $150,000. Madam Chair, that's 32 applications totaling $7,225,000, and they have all been voted to move forward to the commission for approval in May.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bracken. Mr. Bardis, the remaining funding balance?
Madam Chair, remaining funding balance is $5,775,000.
Okay. So, Mr. Bracken, is this for the read, is this the correct number, or is it that one?
That would be the correct number because there
Okay.
are no adjustments inside of that.
Check. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Bardis, thank you, Mr. Bracken. The remaining number of applications is 46 for general assistance grants. Of the 46 remaining applications, 16 received 8 out of 9 recommendations for funding for a totaling $4,675,000. Will the committee consider voting on all 16 of these applications as a group? Now, this is a question, or do we need to discuss and vote on each one of the applications one by one?
Can we make a discussion on just one of those? I don't want to go one by one, but I'd like to discuss one of them.
Okay.
No motion, it's discussion.
Yeah, this is a discussion, no motion.
So, if I got this right, in the first group, we actually have 100K more than what's there, right? Because you're adjusting the 400 to a 300, correct?
Yes?
I'm just making
Correct.
sure my numbers are good.
That's correct.
Okay, so in the second group, because the couple purple ones that are listed are specifically county service offices and priority for the commission, I recommend that, on Family Endeavors, since we've already funded 2 of their 3, that we don't fund that line item. That way we can also look at considering under the red line, the other items, kind of in the same amount. And it stays with the commission's priorities.
You mean the other VSOs?
Yeah, all the other purple ones. The numbers would actually line up and fund all the others, so. I mean, I think that's only fair too, because we're trying to have equitable distribution across the state.
Did anyone else with the committee? Yeah, you were just recognized. Yes, Mr. Bartis.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to clarify that the 100K discrepancy on the city of Fort Worth is taken into account in the numbers that you're seeing. So that is minus the 100K.
Hopefully that made
It
sense.
sounds
Yep,
to me.
you did. At least to me. Then I think you would like a motion to approve.
Well, it's on discussion, that's why. I didn't do anything.
No, that's
I can make another
I'll
comment.
add on to that discussion.
We're still just in a discussion. Yes, Mr. Ball, and yes, Mr. Erig, you'll be next.
Understanding what was already put out, when you take a look, because what we're attempting to do from the original discussion is take the 2 purple line items that are below the red line and bring them above the red line, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, sir.
That value is only $175,000.
I have a caveat
To,
to add
to,
to
to
that.
date, in every other category, we've been in and around the number, and I don't think that there's a reason to push one that 8 votes had out for $175,000. I bet we can find that money. I guess it's just.
So, in addition to that, again, Family Endeavors has two funded programs already above the line on all the other
Sure, yeah.
things. You take that 300 plus the 100 discrepancy, and again, I'm not going by totals, I'm just looking at numbers on the page. You can fund the 2 purples below the line, plus the next satisfactory that didn't make the red line, just because of the red line. And then you are 0 balance. And then you can talk about a couple extras if you want, but
Oh, I see what you're
because we
saying.
had 7 out of 9 of us vote for the one item that's a satisfactory below the red line. If you look, there's only one other satisfactory below that. Everything else is below average or unsat. So it clears the whole board, if you look at it that way. You only have really one to vote on.
Oh.
And then it still lines up with the commissioner's priorities.
Okay, continue the discussion, because it looks like there's only 2 of us discussing this. When I look at Family Endeavors, it does, although it's not a statewide, it does meet every section except for Section 1, the Panhandle, and Section 2, West Texas. And it also meets the priority by the commissioners.
The only reason I brought it up is because they're already funded,
that.
fully funded in 2 other categories.
Yeah, but I would just say, gentlemen, that it's been clearly marked on every sheet, and, you know, we're coming down to the 3rd sheet, and I would just say that we knew that up front, and then the other thing about, let me ask the question, so the other 2 VSOs below the red line is where you wanted to bring up if the voting went the other way, right? Is that what you were thinking?
You bring those 2 up, and you have one program below the red line that hasn't been funded in any category.
You know, I would just say that Mr. Bracken made it pretty clear that, you know, there have been, 4 or 5?
Yep.
Public presentations, and I know I can call that office anytime, these guys, any one of them will pick up the phone, and I would just say that, well, I feel what you're saying, but the rules were established for everyone. And I don't want emotions to get into this, even though you want to get emotional about some things. But I would say that what's in black and white is in black and white is my thought process. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, ironically, during the break, I reflected on this very thing, that these 5 applicants had a choice to either compete among a small group or compete among a large group. And I would hope that the committee would keep the commissioners' guidance and the commissioners' priorities and the commissioners' guidance in mind when you are thinking about this. So you have all independently looked at these, and they are scored and ranked where they are for a good reason through 6 weeks of your independent, non-collaborative reflection and review. And so, for that said, I brought these to everyone's attention because I wanted everyone to recognize what they were, that they weren't just a nonprofit. They are county government trying to fulfill statutory and commission prerogatives.
And I would also make one more comment on this discussion. I have high reservations of giving one organization over $1 million in funding. We just approved them for $800K. Now, I know it's two different things, two different categories, but I have a high reservation being on this committee for a second time of giving over $1 million to one nonprofit in this state, no matter who they are. And that's been a serious concern over the years constantly, and I know the commissioners made a big concern about that one year. That was a significant issue. I'm sure you got hammered on when you went and presented. So again, I bring that up also for discussion.
So noted.
But to your point, I think it's difficult to, I think these applications stand on their own. And because this last application, and because it came last, to say that we're gonna knock them off, seems somewhat arbitrary. You know what I mean?
But so, from my experience in nonprofits over the last decade,
Wait,
of putting those in.
Sir, we please, we have to state the facts that are on the paper, sir, not experience, please.
Okay, so without talking about my experience, it doesn't matter what category. I can tell you right now, I won't vote for somebody to get over $1 million in funding, even if it comes up at the last time. I don't think it has anything to do with when it came up. It's what did we decide on previous to this now, right? So giving $1 million to one nonprofit, no matter who it is, I don't care who it is.
But if we.
It seems like a bad use of our ability to fund programs, right? Because we have the largest state in the nation, and we're trying to spread it out.
Right.
So, again, even if you don't bring the purples up, you could take that $300K here. They're still funded well. They still support the services they do, and you can use the $300K for somebody else on this list, or multiple people on this list that are also spread out throughout the state. We talk about priorities, and also we talk about which parts of the state are underfunded. Maybe we entertain something that's in an underfunded area, as we did previously on the last group. So,
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Allen,
I'd like
I
to
do see you over there.
make a point that family endeavors, although they touch several regions within the state, the projected number of clients is 70, and we're talking about the county service officers in Val Verde and is that Willacy County?
Yep.
You're talking that's down in Region 3 and Region 4 with an impact of 300 people in Val Verde, and then you're talking 200 people in Willacy County. So that's a significant amount of projected number of clients that those funds would go to. Just on the point of, those are some areas that are kind of limited in some of the resources, and I think that it would be better for veterans and programs for support services if we did take a look at moving that family endeavors amount and relook at putting more emphasis on the county service officers, especially those two that are Val Verde and Willacy County in Regions 3 and 4.
All right, so noted, Mr. Wright. We're still in discussion. There's no motions right now. Please.
I defer. The issues have been brought up.
All right. So, any further discussion? All right, so here's what I'm gonna do. We're gonna put a motion out there to vote on 8 of the 9 as a group, and we'll see how we vote, okay? And then from there, how we vote, we'll proceed, okay? So, I'm gonna put it out there. Is there a motion out there to recommend full funding for general assistance organizations that receive 8 out of 9 votes for awarding during our preliminary ranking process? All right, Mr. Ball, you are the motion,
I will make a motion for
okay?
fully funding those applicants that received 8 of 9 votes by the committee.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Wallace. Okay. Is there any additional discussion? I will just say that we've heard from all sides of this committee, all 8 of us. I think we've all chimed in on on thoughts. So, so let's call it. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, 6. 6 are in favor. All those opposed? 2. Okay. Motion passes with 6 yeas and 2 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, I'm going to read the organization name and the amount of funding that received 8 of 9 and who the committee just voted in as a tranche for recommending to the commission for awarding. Empower Incorporated, $300,000. Alamo Area Council of Governments, $300,000. Houston Volunteer Lawyers Program, $250,000. United Way of Denton County, $300,000. Family Endeavors, $300,000. Meals on Wheels of Tarrant County, $300,000. Texas VFW Foundation, $500,000. Rolling Plains Management Corporation, $300,000. Grace After Fire, $150,000. Communities and Schools of Greater Central Texas, $300,000. Honor Veterans Now, $500,000. Burnett County VCSO, $75,000. Bexar County Commissioners VCSO, $300,000. Houston Area Urban League, $300,000. Tropical Texas Behavioral Health, $300,000. And Volunteers of America, Texas, $200,000. Madam Chair, that is 16 organizations that received 8 of 9, to which this committee has just recommended to the commission for approval.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Bardis, the remaining funding balance, sir?
Madam Chair, remaining funding balance is $1,100,000.
All right. All right, with that said, YWCA El Paso del Norte in the amount of $300,000. Is there a motion? No motion? YWCA El Paso del Norte?
Madam Chair, I think we were confused. Are we going now to go individual?
We approved, everybody done it.
Yep.
Just to clarify. Okay,
Yep.
I think that's where the confusion was.
Oh, correction.
So all the 8s we're accepting?
We
Yes?
accepted all the 8s.
All right, I got lost.
Yeah.
You don't
It's okay.
understand.
I don't think you were the only one, but it's okay.
I voted the wrong way then.
Well, gentlemen, I wrote for full funding of 8 of the 9 votes,
Right,
so.
it was.
It was a readout.
Yep, we're good, and it passed anyway.
And in discussion, I was, okay. But the vote's been taken. It's a legal vote. We'll see what the commissioners do about it. Okay, so according to Mr. Bardis, we have 1.1 million. So now, what we can do is if you want, we can, or I would propose, we go ahead and put in another tranche, 7 of the 9, the 7 to the 9s, where 7 of us voted out of the 9 of us.
Madam Chair, will we have enough money for that? Because we're hitting the red line.
Well, if I'm reading what was presented to me,
4,
it will take you down to,
Well, we're gonna be over.
You'll be $1 million over.
Yeah.
oh, okay. Thank you. All right, then we're gonna go line by line. All right,
Well, can I make a,
sure.
based
Absolutely.
on our previous discussions, should we address the VCSO applications now and then deal with what's left? I mean, there seemed to be a consensus that we consider those applications and rather than run out of money before we get even to that line, should we just take that out of context and consider them? And then go back up.
Okay. Make a motion, sir.
I'll make a motion that we consider fully funding the 2 remaining applications for VCSO, and then see what's,
Which 2 are those, sir?
all right, the 2 I'm talking about are Valverde County and Willacy County.
Okay. So the motion out there is to fully fund Valverde County VCSO and Wilsey County VCSO. Valverde would be 75,000. Willacy will be 100,000. Is that correct, Mr. O'Reilly?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Is there a second?
A second.
All right. Seconded by Mr. Allen. Is there any discussion?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
All right, we keep going around and about this, but we knew the rules. We all sat down, looked at each file independently, and voted. These 2 VCSOs opted not to submit in a protected category. They opted to submit in the general category. And when they did, 7 of 9 of you people on the committee voted against Willacy County, and 5 of the 4, the majority, voted against Valverde. And now, when we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other files that we voted as a majority above the proposed red line, we're going to arbitrarily take something, potentially something out of that, to put up 2 files that didn't get voted in the majority and are not protected in this category.
So, Mr. Ball, I hear exactly what you're saying, and if
That's
my
pretty loud.
well, no, sir, because in my previous discussions, I used the same language of the rules are the rules, and 5 public presentations, etc.
Yes, ma'am.
But the passion of this committee is another way, so I chose to do what I did. So we can just take a look at it. Mr. Wright.
Okay. First, one of the reasons we meet for discussion is exactly for reasons like this. If we were gonna make our recommendations and not put anything else into this, we wouldn't be sitting in this room, we'd be done. Not that I'm not calling you out by any means, Mr. Ball. I think we've had this discussion before, and I think you are certainly right. And I will also point out one of those grants was ranked unsatisfactory. Now, having said that, veteran service organizations are not, the veteran service officers generally, especially these 2 counties, are not competing evenly. Many of these grants are outstanding rated because they have hired professional grant writers to go get their funding. Veteran service offices tend to be unsupported. It is an unfunded mandate for the state, and one of the reasons this category was created is to try to help that somewhat. Unfortunately, well, no, I won't go into that. That's the state can worry about that. The point being is these are truly critical services that the commissioners have made a priority. And having said this, one of these is in fact basically in a, what I will call a double commissioner's priority, and the other is in transportation, which was not considered a priority, but the veteran service officers are a priority. And I throw that out there. There is in fact a motion on the table that is within our operating guidelines. And I think it's, if anybody else has anything to say, please say it. But I think we should vote on it, and I think we do have some discretion.
Yes, Mr. Allen.
I would also like to enter in discussion that, based on the remaining balance here, if you take a look at the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 applications above the red line, and you add those up, plus the 2 VCSOs, that would total 1.1 million.
All right, Mr.
So
Allen.
the part of that is to
It's sublime.
keep that in mind.
So noted. Any other discussion? Okay, so, yes, sir. Oh, see, I keep trying to, okay, so here's the way I look at this from my point of the discussion. You know, we sit at home, we read these applications, we've heard presentations, and everybody was given the same thing. But the beauty of this process, of this whole process, is we come together and yeah, you're gonna have second thoughts. Or you're gonna really reflect on what the other guy is talking about. And by the law, we can't get on the phone and talk to each other about this. This is the next opportunity to discuss and be passionate about. So yes, there are rules. I've touted the rules, but yes, then there's what we then come and go, well, hey, wait a minute. And that's the beauty of us all getting together. So with that said, is there any further conversation or discussion? All right, we're going to call the vote on the motion that came out for Valverde County VCSO at $75,000 and Willacy County VCSO at $100,000. All in favor? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 in favor. All those opposed? We have 2. Motion passes. 6 yeas to 2 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I dozed off. Where are we? I'm teasing.
I think you took a shot at us.
Madam Chair, the vote was to fully fund 2 county veteran service office applications. One for Valverde County for $75,000, the other for Willacy County for $100,000. Those 2 will be moved into the category or into the group of applications to be provided to the commissioners for funding decisions in May.
All right, Mr. Bardis, what's left here? How much?
Madam Chair, $925,000 is
All right.
remaining.
So, out of the 7, the one, I want to ask the question, this is a discussion. Out of the ones left, where 7 of us voted to be funded, how much money is that, please?
Above the red line.
Above the red line. So that would be YWCA El Paso del Norte, Community Partnership for the Homeless, Goodwill Central Texas, Big Brothers and Sisters of South Texas, Big Brothers and Sisters of Lone Star. What is that amount, please, sir? Mr. Bardis?
Madam Chair, it is exactly $925,000.
So, what I would like to make a motion, is I'd like to make a motion that in this tranche, for fully funded, YWCA El Paso del Norte region, 300,000, Community Partnership for the Homeless, 150,000, Goodwill Central Texas, 300,000, Big Brothers Big Sisters of South Texas, 75,000, and Big Brothers Big Sisters Lone Star for $100,000 for a total of $925,000. Is there a second? All right, seconded by Mr. Wright. Is there discussion? Nothing heard? Call the vote. All those in favor? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All those opposed? 1. Motion passes for 7 yeas, 0 nays. A correction, 1 nay. So 7 yeas, 1 nay. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, that vote, as you outlined, added 5 more organizations to the list of general assistant applications to be provided to the commission in May for funding decision. Those include YWCA El Paso del Norte, 300,000. Community Partnership for the Homeless, 150,000. Goodwill Central Texas, 300,000. Big Brothers Big Sisters of South Texas, 75,000. Big Brothers Big Sisters Lone Star, 100,000. And that concludes that list of 5, Madam Chair.
All right. So, in the spirit of everything you have, well, not in the spirit, but what you advised us in the beginning, Mr. Bracken, do we need to continue to vote in this category?
Madam Chair, my recommendation to the committee is to consider the lineal ranking of all of those that have not been considered either individually or in a tranche, and to ensure that the committee is comfortable with the lineal listing of those organizations, so that if additional funding were to be made available, that we already have a voted committee recommendation of that lineal recommended list. I will just point out here for the benefit of the public that we have made the committee has voted on making recommendations for each grant category beyond the budgeted or funded amount for the tune of several grant applicants for each category thus far, except VCSO. That does not mean that those organizations that have been voted on will be funded, because we do have a hard limit right now of $30 million.
Does anyone have a motion? Yes, Mr. Ball.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion that the next 4 applications below the proposed red line, which are all voted on by 7 of 9 committee members, which are United States Veteran Initiative, Family Elder Care, Comfort Crew for Military Kids, and Family Service Association of San Antonio, all be approved should funding be available in the order they're listed, fully funded.
Okay, is there a second?
I would second.
Yes, Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen seconds. Mr. Ball presented the motion. Is there any discussion? All right, nothing heard. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, we have 8 in favor. Any nays? Okay, 0 nays. Motion passes with 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken.
Madam Chair, as Mr. Ball listed, those 4 organizations will be added to a lineal ranking maintained by FVA staff in the case that the commission has more funding available to go beyond the red line or the limit that we currently operate or plan against, that we have 4 on deck, voted on, ready to go in the event that there's funding available.
All right. Okay, at this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the 2020-2021 General Assistant Grant recommendations made by the committee to take to the commission for their approval.
So moved.
Mr. O'Reilly? The motion, second. Is there a second? Mr. Harrison? Are there any additional discussion? All those in favor? And all those opposed? Okay, so motion passes with 8 yeas, 0 nays. Mr. Bracken?
Madam Chair, I'm going to, for clarity purposes, I am going to read the name and the amount of the organizations where this committee has made a complete recommendation to the commission for funding.
Thank you, sir.
I will not be reading any names of organizations that are on a, on deck or a priority list. So, beginning from the top, Caritas of Waco, 200,000. San Antonio Metropolitan Ministries, SAM Ministries, 300,000. Nueces County, 150,000. Hale County Meals on Wheels, 75,000. Lone Star Legal Aid, 300,000. City of Fort Worth, 300,000. Caritas of Austin, 75,000. El Paso County VTC, El Paso County VCSO, 300,000. Project Amistad, 300,000. Interfaith Ministries of Greater Houston, 250,000. Family Service Center of Houston and Harris County, 300,000. Fort Bend Senior Meals on Wheels and much, much more, 200,000. Meals on Wheels Montgomery County, 300,000. Salvation Army San Antonio, 300,000. Fort Bend County, 250,000. Texas A&M Research Foundation, 75,000. Easter Seals Central Texas, 250,000. Project Mend, 300,000. Citizens Development Center, DBA Achieve, 200,000. Hidalgo County Community Service Agency, 300,000. Catholic Charities of Central Texas, 300,000. Community Services of Northeast Texas, 300,000. Hope for the Warriors, 250,000. Veterans Center of North Texas, 100,000. CLC Incorporated, 300,000. Center Point, 300,000. City of Laredo, 50,000. Foundation Communities, 200,000. Community Council of South Central Texas, 300,000. Katy Christian Ministries, 150,000. The Salvation Army Grayson County, 100,000. Bring Everyone in the Zone, 150,000. Empower, 300,000. Alamo Area Council of Governments, 300,000. Houston Volunteer Lawyers Program, 250,000. United Way of Denton County, 300,000. Family Endeavors, 300,000. Meals on Wheels of Tarrant County, 300,000. Texas VFW Foundation, 500,000. Rolling Plains Management, 300,000. Grace After Fire, 150,000. Communities and Schools of Greater Central Texas, 300,000. Honor Veterans Now, 500,000. Burnett County VCSO, 75,000. Bexar County Commissioners Court, Bexar County Commissioners Court VCSO, 300,000. Houston Area Urban League, 300,000. Tropical Texas Behavioral Health, 300,000. Volunteers of America, Texas, 200,000. YWCA El Paso del Norte, 300,000. Community Partnership for the Homeless, 150,000. Goodwill Central Texas, 300,000. Big Brothers Big Sisters of South Texas, 75,000. Big Brothers Big Sisters Lone Star, 100,000. Valverde County VCSO, 75,000, and Willacy County Veteran Service Officer, 100,000. Madam Chair, that concludes the list of general assistant grants that this committee has voted to present to the commission for approval in May.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bracken. Okay, our next agenda item, number 9, has to do with our next meeting. I'd like to ask Mr. Bracken to tell us about the next grant cycle coming up, sir.
Ma'am, I need to rest after reading all those names. Can we take a 10-minute break? Okay, so I do have it in script here, ma'am. I'd like to, first of all, mention to the committee that I'm very thankful for all of what the committee members have done, have taught us, have worked with us. It's been a great cycle. Our next meeting is relative to the next grant cycle. And we expect that the request for applications for our 21-22 grants to open in August of 2020. And we'll have a due date for those applications in late October of 2020. FVA will once again host multiple webinars in August, September, and October for grant applicants. And in November 2020, the committee can count on a refresh training, whether it's in person or webinar or both, so we can review Gov grants, review the grant cycle process, and just like we did last year in late October, early November. If you haven't done so, please keep your username and password for Gov grants. Where you can find them again when the time comes, we anticipate the applications will be assigned for review in Gov grants by the advisory committee members starting the first week of January of 21 at the next grant cycle. We further anticipate the next required meeting will be the last week of January or the first week of February of next year. So again, we'll do a 2 to 3 day meeting in late January, early February to hear the presentations for the next grant cycle. And then around the middle of March next year, we'll be doing another recommendation meeting. If any of the committee members have suggestions on training or grants, or if you need information or you want to learn anything more about FVA, please contact me directly. Thank you for your role as an advisory committee member. Chair Reyna will be asked to be present at the May 14th, 2020 meeting with the commissioners.
Where's that at?
It's going to be at the Stephen F. Austin building, and it's on the bottom floor right next to the cantina, the food court. I would recommend and highly encourage all advisory committee members to be present to support your chair, your chairwoman. And the meeting will most likely start at 9 a.m., but there will be a public, there'll be something, an agenda, an announcement posted in the Texas Register. And once we get the details, I'll share them with the committee. But Chair Reyna will be presenting all of your recommendations to the commissioners on May 14th. And we'll be there to support you, ma'am.
Oh, yeah. Please join me.
So I don't have anything else. Again, it's been a pleasure. Would everyone please take note of the FVA staff? Elizabeth, Mike, Julie, Allegra, and Herb over here. These are the people that make all of this happen. So thank you all for running the engine. Madam Chair, I yield the floor.
All right, so I'd like to now call on each committee member for any closing comments, starting off with you, Mr. Harrison.
I'm the new guy, so
Okay.
it was a little bit of a learning process going through this. I appreciate the opportunity that the commission has afforded me by sitting on the advisory committee, and happy to help. That's it.
Mr. Wallace.
Compared to last year, I thought this went great. I thought it was more informative, and I got more information out of it, and I was able to judge or actually rank the people better than I did last year. Yeah, but that's, last year being my first year too, but still it really made a big difference. I appreciate it.
Mr. Allen.
One of the Other new committee members, just want to say thank you for the opportunity to serve veterans and look forward to continue being a member of the committee.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Just to reinforce my appreciation to the staff, Mr. Bracken. It's really been having been through this a number of times, it gets better every year, and it's really extraordinary. And I appreciate the work. Thanks.
Mr. Ball.
I want to say thank you to all the organizations that submitted a grant, whether they're funded or not. I appreciate all the things that they do to help our veterans out, and I appreciate the opportunity to serve on the committee. Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Wright.
I will ditto particularly what Mr. O'Neill said, and congratulations to our about-to-be mom.
Mr. Erig.
I do want to thank the staff because it does get better every year. I also want to thank Mr. Bracken because the metadata we got this year was much more helpful in preparing to come and discuss it here. So, thank you.
Mr. Harrison and Mr. Allen, welcome aboard again. We hope, you got a valuable experience. To all my committee members, let's face it, you've spent a lot of hours at the house or wherever you're doing to figure this all out. You spend time away from your families, and I'm very much appreciative of your support of Texas veterans. So your service, and Mrs. Sconza, for the record, thank you too. Hope you get well. Now, let's talk about the staff. Wow. Julie, Irv, Elizabeth, Jim, Mike, and Allegra. Wow, you guys got what? A new director. Then you got some new initiatives that we were gonna put this live through one of the commissioners. And then just some of the new things, renewals and that. That's a lot of work. It's a ton of work. And I want to let you know, I'm trying to look you all in the eyeball. I really appreciate it. Jim, so I know y'all have done hours and hours and hours and hours. And, Jim, he won't say it, but he was up until midnight trying to figure some things out. And I appreciate every time I call one of y'all or want to discuss something, you're there for me. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate the loyalty, and I appreciate sincerely what you've done. And this year, of all years, wow, it was a Texas tornado plus and a hurricane. So you worked a lot of things real quick and a lot of long hours. So I want to tell you personally my appreciation to each one of you. Ms. Webster, I wish you well. Liberty? Yeah. So with that said, if there are no other comments, I'd like to thank you for your hard work. Entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Mr. Wright,
Second.
is there a second? Mr. O'Reilly, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes with 8 yeas, 0 nays. You guys stay safe with everything that's going on in the world.